All right, chapter one. Good morning, good morning, good morning. The micro skills approach. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. James 1 4. Chapter focus skill, the skill of learning new skills and identifying target skill areas as they relate to the phases of the counseling process. Purpose to discuss the goals of counseling, the roles of counselor and counselee, the language of micro skills, the process of acquiring new skills, the targeted skill areas of the various phases of the counseling process. Formula: I learn new skills best by blank. The phases of the counseling process are characterized by the following target areas blank. Okay, have you read the introduction? Question mark. Yes, I have. If you have not read the introduction preceding this chapter, we suggest you do so before diving into this chapter. It will explain why we have chosen to use particular vocabulary in this book, the specific audiences we are considering, and how the book is organized. The chapter will make more sense if you have read the introduction. Well, I did read the introduction, so praise God. A counseling story. A counseling story. We will begin this chapter with an extended case description. One of the ways people learn new skills is by reading stories about how others have succeeded or not in developing important lessons along their journey. So I, Fred, would like to introduce you to Tommy. As you read this, notice the almost counterintuitive counseling. Counterintuitive counseling responses. Counseling is a particular form of communication in which a different kind of conversation occurs. From the initial phone call, red flags were popping up all over the place. Tommy had previously seen several counselors, and while he now lived in a different town and could not go back to see any of them, I could not help but wonder what I could offer him that the others hadn't. Not only that, but Tommy was a teacher at the same school that my son attended. Hmm. There would be times that our paths would cross at the school, which could be awkward, a situation I would rather avoid if I could. At least Tommy was not my son's teacher. That would have been a role conflict that would be considered unethical for a professional counselor. I still did not like the situation, but our community was small, so there was no one I could refer Tommy to. I decided to meet with Tommy. Tommy was uh, amiable, 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 amiable. Actually, a big teddy bear type. At the beginning of our first session, jokes and sports trivia rolled off his tongue, not something that I gravitated to. And this was a bit of a concern as we entered into what is typically a more serious level of conversation. The lack of serious focus was another red flag. Was Tommy going to be able to engage the counseling process in an attempt to steer him in a fruitful direction? I gently prodded Tommy to share his story. The theme was a common enough rendition of adolescent boys becoming men, with sports and sex dominating his passions. His previous counseling addressed his search for a genuine relationship with women and with men. He had married young, but he and his wife were not particularly close. Their family life was dominated by their three kids. He got together with guys from work to watch sports when he could. He and his family were connected to a church, but they were not involved. The pattern of superficiality in his relationships was clear, all the way from his family of origin to his current life circumstances. His previous counselors, some professional, some pastoral, had been good experiences for Tommy, but all had been short lived. 2 to 10 sessions and irregular, and they simply had repeated the pattern of superficiality. The counselors had tried a variety of things with Tommy. A college discipler had walked with Tommy through a book on sexual purity and the dangers of pornography. One counselor had used a cognitive behavioral approach, delving into Tommy's assumptions about his life and challenging his irrational beliefs. A pastor had begun a structured series of Bible studies on intimacy with God. Another counselor had worked on Tommy's distanced relationships with his family of origin. Another pastoral counselor had confronted him with his deficits in being a Christian husband and father and his deficiencies in leading his family. All of these approaches made sense to me and had proven somewhat helpful to Tommy, but they had ultimately not produced any long lasting core change. Outside the session, I prayed for God's direction for Tommy's and my times together. I was not convinced that pursuing an approach similar to any that prior helpers had used was going to be helpful. I sensed that Tommy would compliantly jump through any hoops that I would set out for him. I figured that he wanted to please others and that he was invested in appearing as though he were working hard. So I expected he would diligently do homework assignments, while on the surface, this made him a people helper's dream. I knew that real change would involve something different. So I resisted the urge to suggest to Tommy that he think, feel, or do anything. I became much less directive than was my normal tendency. I was trained in the skills that form the core of this book, and I believe they were helpful. I had instructors and supervisors who had affirmed these as good foundational skills, but they suggested that if you wanted to see deep change in your counselees, you need to offer more. Put this on silent. Sorry. On do not disturb. Sorry about that. Supervisor who had affirmed these as good foundational skills, but they suggested that if you want to see deep change in your counselees, you needed to offer more. I believe them, but Tommy had been given the more in various forms, and he was struggling with the same issues and themes that had dominated his adolescence and young adulthood. Feeling as though I was being merely a good listener but not much of a counselor, I entered each conversation with Tommy with a commitment to not do what the others had done. Instead, I was committed to simply being with Tommy, following his lead with regard to topic and pace, offering no homework, not directing his reflections or actions. Still, my low level anxiety and my questioning of my competence persisted. I consulted with another counselor about Tommy's case. I regularly checked in with Tommy regarding how he was responding to and feeling about the counseling. I prayed about it, but each session I felt the urging to not direct, suggest, or prescribe anything. I used the skills of this book over and over. We ended counseling 1.5 years later, about 45 sessions. Tommy had decided to take another teaching position in another state, interestingly, in the city where his mother and sister lived, because he had decided he wanted to live closer to extended family. His wife was fully supportive of the move, and Tommy was excited about this new chapter in his own life and marriage. I met Tommy 5 years later through a random set of circumstances. We immediately moved beyond the superficial to his spontaneous expression of gratitude for our sessions together. He knew exactly how to express his current situation. I'm different now. My wife and I connect much more deeply. She sometimes even watches sports with me. I have a relationship with each of my kids. My mom died last year, but we were a family as we grieved. I'm so grateful that I have this chance to thank you for not pushing or pressuring me. I don't know how you knew what I needed, but you got it right. Every other counselor had told me in one way or another that I needed to change. I knew I needed to change, but somehow the homework assignments I completed to make me feel like I was doing something weren't of lasting benefit. I can't really describe what you did to help, but I'm so grateful. Being led by the Spirit, I guess. I don't know. The goals of counseling are to collaboratively set short and long term goals, facilitate the next step of growth, focus on the counselee's needs, foster counselee strengths. The goals are not to give advice, fix things, convince, help counselees feel better or happier. Most of the time, we do not have the benefit of this kind of long term feedback. Particularly in this case, it was wonderful to receive the affirmation that my instincts or spiritual attunement had been correct. I am grateful to Tommy for the reminder that the skills are the, excuse me, I am grateful to Tommy for the reminder that the skills we are describing in this book are not just foundational or preliminary, they are central to the change process. The research on common factors in counseling theory affirms that however you conceptualize the change process, these skills are at the center. Not everyone has the patience to learn them well. Not all counselees have the persistence to spend 45 sessions with a counselor, and some counselors seldom see counselees for such an extended period of time, even if they wanted to. But our belief is that the skills of this book will serve you and your counselees well. Last paragraph of page 12. Last paragraph of page 12. We prefer an approach to counseling that is strengths-based, rather than focused on psychopathology. A psychopathology approach is based in the medical model of diagnosing disease and focuses on the deficits or problems presented within the counselee. While counselee needs and problems bring them to counseling, it is their God-given strengths, abilities, and capacity to heal that will move them forward. This means that throughout counseling, we seek to identify and build on the tools, resources, skills, and abilities that the counselee already brings to the process rather than primarily focus on what is lacking. While deficits or areas that could use further development are not ignored, they are not the foundation on which counseling builds. This was the situation with Tommy. Perhaps counselors had focused primarily on Tommy's deficits, which had only made him more resistant to change. Switching the focus to listening carefully to Tommy's perspective on what was happening and acknowledging the attempts he was making to change ultimately allowed his defenses to come down. In time, this more strengths-based approach allowed Tommy to make great strides in the areas in which he had long been stuck. Verse 13. Page 13. I'm just going to go live on Facebook. Gonna try, just like the COVID days. Just read books to people. All right, what up, Facebook? Reading skills for effective counseling, a faith-based integration. A faith-based integration. I don't know if it's too tight or not. Feels good. All right, I'm on page 13. What counseling is not? This is a Christian book on counseling, skills for effective counseling, a faith-based integration. With the many different uses of the word counseling in the English language, it is understandable that there may be some confusion about what counseling is and is not. Excuse me. For example, people might assume that the goal of counseling is simply for the counselor to, quote unquote, give advice and for the counselee to act on that advice. However, While there may be a time and place for the counselee to offer an opinion or make a suggestion, counseling is built on the idea that most of the time the counselee has the potential to make good decisions but is too overwhelmed or confused, having insufficient self awareness, or lacking the support he needs in order to be able to identify or act on what, at some level, he already knows. All right, so let me just point this out. It says, however, for example, people might assume that the goal of counseling is simply for a counselor to give advice and for counselor to act on the advice. However, may be a time and place for the counselor to offer an opinion. And what a minimization there, huh? What a minimization. So as a biblical counselor, Christian counselor, Christian and biblical counselor put together, um, there's times to state facts, but they minimalize that. They don't put that in there. You may have time to offer an opinion or make a suggestion. So that's weak. I don't like that. I don't like that. I'm just letting you know right at the gate. I'm just going through this book and we'll see what happens. But they're like, oh, and hey, I'm all about asking questions, leading people on a journey. We're doing some exploration. Like all that is important. There's times for that, but there are also times to say, hey, this is what God's word said. This is a black and white issue on this, and informing people. There's time for it. We'll see. Has the potential not just to give an opinion or make a suggestion. Okay. Most of the time, the counselee has the potential to make good decisions, but is too overwhelmed or confused, having insufficient self awareness, or lacking the support he needs in order to be able to identify or act on what, at some level, he already knows. Blah, blah, blah. The irony is that even though the counselee may ask for advice, the counselor adding his or her advice to the mix may actually be unhelpful. Either the counselor does not know the counselee well enough, the counselee resents the counselor's wisdom, or the counselor gives bad advice. Now, look, to me, that kind of falls in that stuff where it's you gotta, earn the right to be heard, right? You can't just share the gospel with someone. You gotta build this friendship over, 13 years before you share the gospel with them. Crazy. Furthermore, it cannot be our goal in counseling to quote unquote fix the counselee, make her do or feel something, or convince her of something. This goal puts the counselee in too passive a role and puts too much responsibility and power in the hands of the counselor, violating the premise that counseling is collaborative and counselee focused. It furthermore undermines the belief that the counselee's sense of autonomy and personal responsibility needs to be honored. Tommy's previous counselors had not recognized that in doing what they thought would be helpful to Tommy, example, giving him homework to do and making suggestions as to what might be helpful, they were actually disempowering Tommy in his healing process. Finally, it is not the goal of counseling to make the counselee feel better. This can be particularly difficult for counselors who have been drawn to a helping role because they want to alleviate suffering. The irony is that counselees sometimes have to experience even a greater amount of pain than they were aware of initially in order to heal. The goal is to facilitate the counselee in being better, which in turn may eventually lead to them feeling better. There we go, Sister Faye. Good morning. Good morning. Page 14 of Skills for Effective Counseling, a Faith-Based Integration by Elizabeth Nesbet Bonato, Heather Avdiak Gingrich, and Fred C. Gingrich. All right, page 14. Although multifaceted, the counselor takes on very distinct and specific roles within the counseling relationship. The counselor serves as a confidant, a mirror, a coach, and an encourager. As a confidant, the counselor is a person with whom the counselee can share personal and intimate things without fear that such information will later be disclosed by the counselor to anyone else. This confidentiality is a foundational element to the counseling relationship as it provides a space for emotional safety for the counselee. In parentheses, we will explore the limits of confidentiality in the next chapter when we discuss counseling ethics. The next paragraph, let's see, they give you Proverbs 27:19, as water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart. As a mirror, the counselor uses both verbal and nonverbal communication to reflect back to the counselee what the counselor sees, hears, and experiences within the counseling relationship. As people, we are limited in our self understanding and rely on the direct and indirect feedback of others to gain self awareness, insights, and understanding of social cues. The counselor, as a mirror, seeks to reflect back to the counselee without distorting the message or adding evaluative judgments in order that the counselee can more clearly see himself and the situation. What we have here is Proverbs 16:21. The wise in heart are called discerning, and gracious words promote instruction. As a coach, the counselor brings his or her experiences and training to the therapeutic relationship in order to gently guide the counselee through the process of cultivating her skills, abilities, and aptitudes. In this, the counselor serves as the expert in the counseling process while honoring the counselee's role as expert of her own life. The coach helps to clarify vision, collaboratively design a plan, offer growth opportunities, and provide both challenges and affirmations along the way. As an encourager, the counselor seeks to continuously remain in a position of respect, understanding, and hope toward the counselee. While it cannot be expected that every counselor will like or enjoy every counselee, it is necessary that counselors prayerfully and intentionally strive to see, honor, and affirm the image of God in every counselee. Whether it's spoken or unspoken, the counselor, as an encourager, seeks to affirm and champion the steps of growth and the progress made by the counselee, no matter how small. Proverbs 12:25, anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. Sprinkling of scriptures. Unlike most friendships, counseling relationships are not reciprocal. The participants do not take equal turns sharing struggles, joys, and insights. Instead, in counseling, the counselor has the distinct role of coming alongside the counselee in order to facilitate the counselee's growth process. Counseling is all about what the counselee needs, not about relational reciprocity. Our goal as counselors is to ultimately work ourselves out of a job by collaborating with counselees to resolve their problems in a way that utilizes their strengths and talents. Joshua Davis, good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Reading a book called Skills for Effective Counseling, a Faith-Based Integration. So far, so good. So far, so good. Last paragraph, the focus, let's see, our goal as counselors is ultimately to work ourselves out of a job by collaborating with counselees to resolve their problems in a way that utilizes their strengths and talents. The focus of the counselor is always on fostering, facilitating, and promoting the growth and the good of the counselee, not on the counselor's needs for growth, affirmation, or fulfillment. In working with Tommy, it would have been much easier for Fred to have been more directive, at least by giving homework. He could have had more objective evidence of getting somewhere with Tommy. That is, if he actually completed it, continuing to remind himself that the ultimate goal was what would be beneficial for Tommy, allowed Fred to put aside more immediate needs for success and fulfillment. In parentheses, in chapter 2, we will discuss further the person of the counselor. That is, what personal qualities and characteristics are necessary for a good counselor. All right, the counselee's role. The counselee's role. This is page 15. Good morning, everybody. 9:16 Central Time, 10:16 Eastern Time. Good morning. The counselee's role, the role of the counselee is much less complex than that of the counselor. Essentially, the counselee needs to, one, recognize that something in his life is not the way he wants it to be. Number two, seek the support, input, or help of another person. And number three, be willing to, at least to some degree, honestly engage in a process of self-exploration and change. The degree to which a counselee can embrace these three elements will vary from one individual to another and may even change throughout the counseling process. Remember, it took Tommy several counselors over many years to be able to eventually truly engage in the process. Since many counselees have never before been in a counseling relationship and others may not have had a good experience in previous counseling, we have found it beneficial not to assume that counselees understand the counseling process as we do. Therefore, we initially explain to counselees the respective roles of counselee and counselor at the beginning of the counseling relationship. This way, everyone involved is clear as to what the respective roles are and can adjust their expectations accordingly at the beginning of the journey together. And this counseling stuff, it does remind me of being a real estate agent. And when I first meet a client, I'm supposed to give them this little blue paper, three trifold paper, saying, "Hey, this is what agency is. This is what it is. I'm going to represent you as we try to purchase a property, whether it's land or a house, or if I'm representing the seller and I say, hey, we want to sell this house over here." And I give them this form and I have them sign it saying that they read it or understand what the agency, the relationship is. What does agency mean? So kind of like this, you're communicating to these people, hey, this is what a counseling relationship looks like. The concept of micro skills, long-term goals, are often impossible to reach unless they are broken down into achievable short-term goals. So while it is important to collaboratively identify where the counselee eventually wants to end up, much of counseling involves helping the counselee to move to the next step in the counselee's growth process. We all tend to make life changes in small steps. Just as the counselee's long-term goals need to be dismantled into smaller pieces, so too the skills of counseling need to be divided into. John T. Christian Library, New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, New Orleans, Louisiana. There we go. They got that stamp on page 15. Into small pieces, so too the skills of counseling need to be divided into what have been called micro skills. Micro skills are teachable, learnable segments of new behavior that combine together into the overall skills of counseling. You have probably noticed that so far we have used the words skills or micro repeatedly and interchangeably. Technically, micro skills refers to the process of taking a large and complicated skill, what has been called a macro skill, e.g., skiing or bike riding, close parentheses, and dividing it into smaller bite-sized pieces. If the smaller pieces are mastered, the chances of mastering the larger, more complex skill are greatly improved. Balancing, pedaling, braking, steering, and negotiating bumps in the road are all micro skills necessary in learning to ride a bike. Likewise, perceiving chapter 4 and attending chapter 5 are micro skills that, when combined with each other and added to additional micro skills, can help you to counsel effectively. Effectually. That's a nice word. Effectually. Sorry. Effective counseling. It went effectually to effective. Counseling consists of learned and practiced skill. Simply desiring to having some knowledge of the counseling process, hoping for the best, or praying for someone are not enough. There are specific things we can learn in order to be helpful. Let's see. Here's types of counselees and counselors. It says the solution focused / brief therapy literature identifies a helpful typology of counselee-counselor relationships, in parentheses, avoiding labeling people, but emphasizing the relationship dynamic in each case. So here we go. It says visitor / host. The counselee wants to window shop, checking counseling out, minimally investing, and leaving other options, such as miracles, open for achieving change. Now, such counselees are often mandated or pressured. Such counselees are often mandated or pressured to go for counseling or have some ulterior motive. Example, pleasing someone else. The role of the counselor is to be hospitable and ease the counselee into the process while being clear about what counseling is and is not. The downside of this set of roles is that counseling is potentially much more than being a gracious host, uh, complainant, and sympathizer. This counselee is interested primarily in discussing someone else in her life who is interpreted as causing the counselee's distress. The counselee wants the other person to change and wants help to get the other person to change. As counselors, in response to what are often sad and even traumatic relationship stories, we feel genuine sympathy, but sympathy does not facilitate change. As this book will emphasize, counseling requires something more, something deeper. Number three, customer consultant. This counselee truly wants to address an issue in his life, desires to change, wants to modify circumstances, and is willing to engage in the process, to buy into the process. The counselor becomes a consultant of the process, not determining the outcome for the counselee. The power of the counseling relationship is in this dynamic and these roles. As counselors, we want to invest ourselves in customers and not waste our time and energy on the others. But our skills will go a long way to helping visitors and complainants become customers. Do not give up on visitors and complainants too soon. Fear and anxiety of what counseling will require of them may be what is getting in the way. A counselor's skills can quickly uncover this resistance to the process. For further information, see Sigler, PB 2010, Visitor, Complainant, Customer, Revisited. Doing something different, solution focused, brief therapy practices. All right, well, there you go. Very nice. The skills of learning new skills. The skill of learning new skills. Haven't done this yet. This is page 17. We all know that it is not enough to simply want to be good at doing something new. We have to figure out how to learn to be proficient at a task. In short, learning new skills is a skill in itself. Some people master it, others struggle repeatedly. A metaphor, learning a language. The journey of learning counseling skills is, in many ways, like learning a new language. Initially, you might have some limited vocabulary and a sense of the new language, but despite your confidence and natural language learning abilities, fluency is a long way off. You may have used some of the new language in other contexts as you explain the change, growth, and healing process that people undergo. But the depth of fluency needed to engage with a counselee's deep concerns comes with its own structure, style of speech, and vocabulary, requiring you to take the natural skills that you bring to this process and build on them. Last paragraph of this section, if you have ever learned a second, in parentheses, or third language, you understand that the process is both rewarding and frustrating. You know how to say all that you think, feel, see, and so on in your native language, and it takes time to build up the same level of vocabulary, self-expression, and fluency in the new language. In counselor training, as with language, no, as with language leaning. Do they mean to say learning? This is like the Minnesota, the Leering Center. The Leering Center. Bro, come on. You know, when you read a book and you're like, that can't be a typo, right? In counselor training, as with language leaning, it may be necessary to unlearn some of your former language of helping in order to relearn the new language through systematic engagement with micro skills. There's no way in counselor training, as with language, it should say learning. It can't say leaning. As with language leaning, language leaning, language leering, the Leering Center in Minnesota. Dang it. It may be necessary to unlearn some of your former language or helping in order to relearn the new language through systematic engagement with microskills. All right, another metaphor, learning to drive. Actually, before I do that, let me go over here. This is empirical support. Let me read this. Hearn, 1976. Let me read this empirical support for us. Hearn, 1976, is a foundational research study on programmed learning of counseling skills, showing that systematic training of counselors is effective. In 1990, Baker, Daniels, and Greeley's meta-analysis compared Kharkov's human resource training / development model, Ivy's micro-counseling model, and Kagan's interpersonal process recall model. In the 1980s and 1990s, these models were the most popular and widely used programs for training students in counseling skills courses. The meta-analysis showed that while all three were effective, there appeared to be a relationship between the length of training and the effective size. Table 1.1, comparison of micro skills training models. Kharkov in the late 1960s, 1.07. This is effect sizes, 1.07 hours of training, 37. Ivy, early 1970s, 0.63 medium hours of training, 19. Kagan, mid 1980s, 0.20 small, 9.5 hours of training. Okay, whatever that means. More recently, Little, Packman, Smabby, and Maddox, 2005, combined the Kharkov and Ivy models into a training program called the Skilled Counselor Training Model. And many additional innovations and variations are found in the literature. As the research has developed, studies have begun to look at what components, micro skills, of the programs produce the largest effect sizes. Kuntze, 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 Van der Molen, and Born in 2009, with a sample of 583 students, studied 7 basic skills, in parentheses, minimal encouragements, asking questions, paraphrasing, reflecting of feeling, concreteness, summarizing, and situation clarification, and 5 advanced skills, in parentheses, advanced accurate empathy, confrontation, positive relabeling, examples of one's own, and directness, close parentheses, and found that each of the separate skills had large effect sizes, except for one advanced skill, in parentheses, example of one's own, close parentheses, which had a moderate effect size. Another conclusion was that students taking a second, in parentheses, advanced skill course increased their basic skill levels further, as well as began to master the advanced skills. The amount of practice affects the development of skills. There are, unfortunately, no shortcuts. Touche. It is 30 minutes past the hour, 9:30 Central Time, 10:30 Eastern Time. Good morning. All right, now we're on page 18 of this book, Skills for Effective Counseling, a Faith-Based Integration by Elizabeth A. Nesbitt, Bonato, Heather Davedyuk, Gingrich, and Fred C. Gingrich. Praise God. Another metaphor, learning to drive. The micro skills will be taught one at a time and will be sequenced so that they build on one another. They provide the basic structure and framework for the counseling process. When I, Elizabeth, was in driver's education, I was taught that keeping my hands on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position, as in the hands on a, in parentheses, non-digital clock, was the proper way to drive. The idea of 10 and 2 being applied to counseling was first introduced to me by a friend and colleague, Dr. Elizabeth Keller Dupree, hyphenated Keller Dupree, as a helpful way to explain the process of learning the core counseling microskills. Whether you were taught 10 and 2, 9 and 3, or simply to keep both hands on the wheel, there was likely a position you were taught to go back to as your quote unquote proper driving form. If the counseling process is a road on which you journey with a counselee, micro skills serve as the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel as you navigate the counseling process. However, many of us do not drive with our hands perfectly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel all the time. In fact, we frequently with one hand, or at times may even drive with our knees, exclamation point. But the 10 and 2 position is where we come back to when the road is rough, the terrain is unknown, or the environmental conditions are dicey. The same is true in the counseling process. It is important that you learn to drive at 10 and 2, proving that you understand and can effectively use the foundational micro skills of counseling so that you can come back to them when you are unsure how to navigate the counseling conversation. Eventually, when you have mastered the 10 and 2 of the micro skills, you will slowly take more freedom to incorporate one-handed approaches to counseling and maybe even drive with your knees, positions that are not recommended in driving or counseling but are occasionally necessary. There we go. What's up, everybody? Reading a book on skills for effective counseling. It's like a Christian counseling book for grad school, a faith-based integration. Kind of talking it through. Happy to have you guys on this morning. Rationale for our method of learning skills. Learning skills. Our rationale for the methods used in this book is drawn from various sources within the education and counseling fields, combining what we see as the best of the methodologies. The well-known taxonomies of cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains in education, in parentheses, Bloom, Engelhardt, First, F-U-R-S-T, Hill, and Krathwohl, 1956, close parentheses, such that learning new information and skills involves all three domains and is not limited to simply the acquisition of cognitive knowledge. In parentheses, see Anderson and Krathwohl, 2001, for an updated version of Bloom's taxonomy, close parentheses. Mental skills, in parentheses, the cognitive domain, as Robert Kellerman likes to say, rational. The mental skills, the cognitive domain, are essential, but likewise, change in feelings or emotional dynamics, the affective domain, and developing manual or physical skills, the psychomotor domain, we call that volitional, are each relevant to the effective practice of counseling. Hence, learning counseling skills involves the learner cognitively, emotionally, and behaviorally. Learning new skills requires motivation, a compelling purpose, risking, practice and more practice, receiving feedback, resisting discouragement, and persistence. This is page 19. It says, other influence on our model include Linehan's, L-I-N-E, line, H-A-N, Linehan's. 1993 approach to helping counselors develop new personal and interpersonal skills. In addition, we will be integrating elements of a programmed learning approach, in parentheses, Evans, Hearn, Ullman, and Ivy, 2011, Hearn, 1976, close parentheses, in which the learning process is scaffolded. One skill building on a previous skill. Finally, we will also add some of the practical steps of micro skills acquisition as identified by Chang, Scott, and Decker, 2013. Okay, here we go. So we got this little ladder, or not ladder. These are steps. These are steps. Number one, reading, listening, observing, experiencing. That's fine. Probably not much to argue there in the counseling process. As a counselor, reading, listening. I'm reading someone. I'm reading the situation. I'm reading body language, audibly, listen to what they're saying, observing and experiencing. The next step in these stairs, reflecting and identifying. Reflecting and identifying. And that's like this reflecting is what they're talking about. It's like, okay, so what I hear you saying is that when your brother treated you like that in your childhood, it frustrated you. So whether it's you're not quite saying it verbatim, but you're basically kind of clarifying, kind of checking in. Hey, am I picking up what you're putting down? Okay, so that's reflecting, identifying. The next step, practicing again and again. Next step, analysis and understanding. Next step, clarifying. Next step, evaluating and modifying. And then the last step is generating. So we'll see how this is figure 1.1 on page 19, sequence and scaffolded learning. While we do not often break down the process in much detail, learning a new skill could be summarized in a sequence of steps, such as the one in figure 1.1. Humans, as we grow and develop, have the ability to collapse these steps into an almost unconscious sequence. Only when we are really motivated do we make it more intentional in order to master more complex and significant skills. Okay, very good. That's page 20 now. How we plan to teach the micro skills. We have chosen to break the process down into 5 major steps that will form an outline for each of the micro skill chapters. While this is a sequence, one following the other, and scaffolded, building on the previous step approach, real skill acquisition may be more recursive than this suggests. The need to go back to prior steps and repeat and practice earlier steps that you thought you had already mastered is not an uncommon experience and should not be cause for discouragement. The 5 steps we will use as an outline are. Now, this is funny. Yeah, hey, what's up, Heather? How you doing, girl? What's going on? And Miss Vicky, good morning. Good morning. Good to see everybody. How y'all doing? We made it into February. Yo, Mardi Gras ended yesterday. Fat Tuesday was yesterday. Today is Ash Wednesday for all those that practice that. Ash Wednesday. Well, they got like 40 days of Lent, huh? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm back in seminary trying to finish a master's in Christian counseling and discipleship. Well, Christian counseling. So we'll see how it goes. Now, here's some of these things. It says rationale for skill. Why do counselees need this skill? Why do counselors need to learn this skill? And then it goes into this next box, clear instructions. Where does this skill take you and how do we get there? And then following instructions is an important counselor and counselee skill. And then the next box. Models can be imitated, but personalities can't be. And how will my emerging style compare to this model? How will it differ? It says observe. It says you said essay. Oh, with the button. Oh my gosh, sorry, Heather. Thanks for keeping me on my toes, Heather. I got it. I got button all the way to the top. That's so funny. Essay. I'm like, essay. I'm not writing an essay. I'm reading a book. Yo, you got to keep me on my toes. No, I got it. I got the button all the way up. This is also that hardcore look. I don't know if you remember absolutely, hardcore music scene in the 90s. So that's good times. Miss those days. Now we're just reading counseling books. Praise God. How will my emerging style compare to this model? How will it differ? Observe. You said essay. Put ideas and observations into action. Repeat patterns of behavior so as to build new neural pathways and practice. Personal blinders and sensitivities may mean that I need more objective feedback on performance, and then humility in the process will get you a lot further. Yeah, gotta have that humility. Can't be prideful. Can't be stuck up. Can't think you know it all. Gotta remain teachable. Step 1, provide a rationale for the skill. Anytime a new skill is pursued, the learner must understand why this skill is relevant or important. Leenham, 1993. Therefore, when each new skill is introduced, we will look at why it is important. In terms of overall micro skill development, research findings show that counselees report higher levels of satisfaction with the counseling process when micro skills are used, regardless of whether the counselee is an adult or a child. DeStefano, Mann, Feder, Gazzola, 2010, Kuntz, Van der Molen, and Born, 2009, and Van Vessler, 2004. Step 2, provide clear instruction. The second step is skill development. The second step in skill development is to provide clear instruction. Lyman, 1993, page 34. There is little that is more frustrating than being given a task without a clear sense of how it is to be done. In light of this, as each micro skill is introduced, we will clearly communicate how it is to be delivered and used within the counseling process. In many cases, a specific formula will be provided that serves as a template for exactly what to say. What a good time. Oh yeah, no, that was a good joke. That was a good joke. I don't know if you can see my little kitties out here. See my little kitties? It's my blue Jeep, and there's my little kitties on the attack. Attack, little. That's Trigger and Felipe. Trigger is the white and the tan and the dark, yeah. And Felipe is the little dude over there, yeah. Good times. Good times. Good little kitties. All right, how to deliver, use within counseling. In many cases, a specific formula will be provided that serves as a template for exactly what to say. Now we're on page 21. Page 21, friends. The micro skills approach. Step 3, observe an effective model. The third step in skill development is that of, in italics, observing an effective model. All right, parentheses, Chang, Scott, Decker, 2013, Lyman, 1993, page 34. You will be provided with dialogue examples in which an exchange between a counselor and a counselee models the appropriate use of the skill being taught. Beyond the scope of this book are many counseling training videos available that can be watched as good and not so good demonstration of the skills. That should be a good time, right? Excuse me. Step 4, practice the new skill. The fourth step in skill development flows naturally out of the third and is that of, in italics, practicing the new skill. Chang, Scott, Decker, blah, 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 Lyman, great. It is not enough to simply read about and observe a new skill. Making it your own requires multiple forms of practice. In some instances, practice will mean reading an exchange between counselee and counselor and filling in the missing blanks within the counselor's response. In other instances, practice will mean generating your own response from scratch, keeping in mind the formulas and guidelines presented along the way. Finally, other instances of practice will ask you to engage with a partner or a small group by taking on the role of counselor and responding to the narrative your role-playing counseling shares. Good times. Good times. Step 5, evaluate. Evaluate. The fifth step in skill development is that of evaluation. Chang, Scott, Decker, Lyman. Repeated efforts to learn a new skill must be accompanied by feedback so that necessary adjustments can be made to the process. Practicing skills incorrectly would be a waste of time. Evaluation has to, it's the word FOCI. Is that foci? Foci? Is that like focuses? I don't know. Got me. Fossey? Got me. My PG County education has failed me. Evaluation has two FOCI. Evaluation of self and evaluation from others. Evaluation of self is the process by which you reflect on your own work, comparing it to the guidelines, standards, or answer keys that are available to you in this process. For written practice activities, this takes the form of comparing your responses to the key at the end of the chapter. For in class and homework practice activities, this takes the form of reviewing your audio, video recording, and comparing your responses to the standards and guidelines you have been given for the skill being practiced. Evaluation from others is often the most anxiety-provoking part of this process, for in it we invite others to comment on our demonstrated skills. For those who, for whatever reason, have some sensitivity regarding receiving feedback, this can easily become discouraging and demoralizing. In a later chapter, we will address the dynamics of giving and receiving feedback in more depth. Whether you are evaluating a classmate or you are the one being evaluated, it is important to remember that skill acquisition is a developmental process. This means that someone who is just learning a skill should not and cannot be evaluated by the same standard one would use to evaluate someone who has been using a skill for the last 10 years. Because of this, we encourage evaluation to be on a Likert scale, Likert, Likert scale, that looks something like this. Turns page, turns page. Page 22, table 1.2, proficiency levels for ratings of microskills. So you got a rating 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Number 1, do not use targeted skill appropriately. Use of skill is ineffective or demonstrates a lack of understanding as to skill's purpose. Number 2, sometimes uses targeted skill appropriately. Number 3, often uses targeted skill appropriately. Use of skill is minimally effective or demonstrates basic understanding or skill's purpose. Number 4, regularly uses targeted skill appropriately. 5, consistently and appropriately uses targeted skill. Use of skill is highly effective or demonstrates advanced understanding and proficiency. As you begin this journey of micro skill development, your practice attempts early on in the process should not yield a score of 5 unless you are some kind of micro skill genius, exclamation point. Your first few practices will likely be around a 2 or a 3, and it may not be until a few months or years into counseling experience that you find yourself consistently at a 4 or 5, particularly for the most advanced micro skills. As you evaluate one another, be kind, but do not be dishonest in your kindness. Telling individuals that they did a great job when they actually have things to work on does not help them to learn the new skill. Likewise, it is not helpful to nitpick when their overall delivery was appropriate and effective. All right, next paragraph says the professional and spiritual discipline of forming habits. All right, the professional and spiritual discipline of forming habits. Takes a drink. There's the trash truck. There's the trash truck, and I did not take the trash to the end of the curb. Let me see if they are still. Oh my goodness. They have not picked up the trash. Yo, let me go take my trash down. Let me go take my trash down. How? I'll be right back. So sorry about that. Had to get that. All right. Oh, young Sharky. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Harold Young Sharky. That's great. Cheers. All right. Good morning. So far, so good. I don't know of. Where is the 365? I got a little hourglass. It's actually a 15-minute glass. Shout out to the 15-minute glass. Put that over here somewhere. And I don't know where I'm not sure where my little one is. All right. Just keep on rolling. Got some chargers here for later. I'll go rake leaves while I'm charging. Oh, there it is. Okay, let me do that. What is the small one on? Okay, let me go plug these in. Sorry. I'm gonna plug in there. I'm gonna plug these in. All right, good. We're charging. We are charging, everybody. We are charging. Back to this book. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see, evaluation from others. It's often the most anxiety-provoking part of this process. For in it, we invite others to comment on our demonstrated skills. For those who, for whatever reason, have some sensitivity regarding receiving feedback, this can easily be discouraging and demoralizing. In a later chapter, we'll address the dynamics of giving and receiving feedback in more depth. Whether you are evaluating a classmate or you are the one being evaluated, it is important to remember that skill acquisition is a developmental process. Thanks so much, book. This means that someone who is just learning a skill should not and cannot be evaluated by the same standard one would use to evaluate someone who has been using a skill for the last 10 years. Because of this, we encourage evaluation to be on a like, okay, blah, 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 we read that. Oh, geez, I did read all this. I didn't do the historical reflection yet. Let's see how we're doing here. Let's see. Blah, blah, blah. Are we at the professional and spiritual discipline of forming habits? I read these ratings. For it would likely be around a 2 or 3. Blah blah blah. Years. Blah blah blah. And to experience that you find yourself consistently at a 4 or 5, particularly for the most advanced micro skills. As you evaluate one another, be kind, but do not be dishonest in your kindness. Telling of individuals that they did a great job when they actually have things to work on does not help them to learn the new skill. Likewise, it is not helpful to nitpick when their overall delivery was appropriate and effective. The professional and spiritual discipline of forming habits. The word discipline and habit do not evoke positive responses in our contemporary culture. Yet, when we think about any professional person, we know that it took them practice to get where they are. We know this is true spiritually as well. Unfortunately, we do not simply grow into new, healthy patterns of living and relating. It takes practice. Interestingly, the resistance you might feel in reading the words discipline and habit are the same reactions your counselors will have when you discuss with them the need to alter life patterns. Developing habits is often considered in the negative. For example, quote, I have the bad habit of saying, We would like to reclaim a positive meaning for habit in the sense of encouraging counselors to develop the good habits of counseling. However, we know from our efforts that failing miserably at New Year's resolutions, that breaking old habits and acquiring new ones is harder than we think. This is where our spiritual resources, example, meditation, prayer, silence, conversation, close parentheses, can be a useful part of the process of developing habitus. Are they giving us the Latin now? Are they giving us the Latin? Habitus. The refinement of good patterns of relating to others for their own good, not necessarily ours. Praise God. Historical reflection. Going back to Plato and Aristotle, humanity has been curious about the virtues, in parentheses, pro-social attitudes and behaviors, close parentheses, and how we can help promote virtuous thinking and behaving in others. One of the virtues that church fathers and later theologians, in parentheses, Augustine and Aquinas, have discussed is the importance of habitus. Latin. Habitus is not simply developing good habits or of moral behavior, in parentheses, repetition of automatic behaviors, close parentheses. Habitus refers to how repeated actions become internalized as perfected dispositions to act for good. Repeated actions can also become bad habits. Habitus refers to non-identical, excuse me. Habitus refers to non-identical repetition, in parentheses, doing a similar thing over and over, close parentheses. It is a repetition of behavior that, quote, forms beliefs, shapes, and modulates emotion, and correctly aligns our appetites and apprehensions, close parentheses. Hampson, 2012, page 8. While they become second nature to us, they also evolve and become refined with practice. Last paragraph of the historical reflection. Faith itself is a gift from God that we receive, but it is also habitus. We must practice our faith in the same way that the other virtues must be practiced. Counseling skills must be practiced to form in us a way of relating that is not only a non-identical habitual pattern of responding, but a deeply held set of beliefs and potential ways of engaging in helpful behaviors. Depending on the nuances and context of the particular situation, they too require continuous refinement. So as a historical reflection, that was pretty light, I would say. Pretty light historical reflection, bit on the light side. All right, the counseling process. This is the second half of page 23. The counseling process. Learning how to ride a bike was one of the metaphors we use for learning counseling skills. The micro skills of balance, steering, and pedaling are all necessary for the macro skill of bike riding. But there is not a whole lot of value in learning how to ride a bike if you do not have a destination. Actually, arriving at your endpoint involves all of the riding skills as well as knowing how to get there and what to do if there are detours or flat tires along the way. Similarly, counseling involves a journey that you, as the counselor, and the counseling take together with a specific destination in mind. Developing good micro skills is essential to the success of the trip, but part of the art of counseling involves knowing what micro skills to use when. This is where an understanding of the process of counseling is crucial. While each of the unique helping contexts we are addressing has its own distinctive aspects and styles, The processes of these various helping relationships have a lot in common. All counseling type relationships consist of two, in parentheses, or more, close parentheses, people who have mutually agreed to go on a journey of growth together, a journey in which one person, the counselor, has the primary goal of facilitating the other person's, in parentheses, counselee's, growth in a particular area. The counseling process is not linear or sequential. It is circular and repetitive, more like a spiral, in that at times it feels as if things are being repeated, are not going anywhere, or are frustratingly slow. However, the spiral has an overall upward trajectory. We believe that in the repetition, the ups and downs of the process, growth is occurring. Created in the image of God, Genesis 1:27. We are complex beings with multiple layers or facets, and let me name them for you. It's not in the book, but this is Robert Kellerman. We are relational, we are rational, we are emotional, we are volitional, and we are physical. Thank you. Therefore, cycling through the layers of our identities at different times in slightly different ways aids in the healing process. Okay, we're talking about healing. The phases of the counseling process, semicolon, what is targeted when? My, Fred's, in parentheses, master's thesis consisted in part of a massive literature review of stages or phases of the counseling process. It is amazing to see the variety of ways in which people can conceptualize it. In 1984, I found over 100 authors who described the process, and now many more have added their wisdom to describe the process by which people change and grow. The theoretical underpinnings of phase language, while many of these authors would describe their phases as universal for all counseling processes, the reality is that theoretical orientation often influences how such phases are described. For example, Wright's 1984 five-step model includes relationship building, exploration of problems, deciding on a course of action, stimulating action, and number 5, terminating the counseling relationship. The language sounds very behavioral or oriented toward problem-solving approaches. In contrast, the 5 counseling phases outlined by Young in 1992 include number 1, initial contact, number 2, commitment, number 3, intimacy, 4, untying, and 5, termination. The relational terms imply a very different theory of counseling. Sure do. The phase challenge. As we considered how we would like to identify phases of the counseling process here, our dilemma was how could we describe them in a way that was not specifically geared to a particular theoretical approach and yet could be of the benefit for helping students understand which skills should be used at certain points in the process. Yeah, they don't want to be a Republican or Democrat. They like to be independent. The solution we came up with was to discuss the phases in the very simple terms of early, middle, and late phases. The amount of time spent in each phase will vary immensely, depending on the overall duration of counseling with a particular counselee. So, for example, if a particular counselee is in counseling on a weekly basis for a total of 8 weeks, the first week or 2 would constitute the early phase. Sessions 3 through 6 would constitute the middle phase, and sessions 7 and 8 would constitute the late phase. In contrast, if counseling were long-term, the early phase might be the first year of counseling, the middle phase, the next 3 years, and the final year, the late phase. Targets. We briefly described the concept of targets in the introduction to this book, while using the language of phases helps to give a sense of process over time. The idea of targets relates more to specific tasks or areas of focus that can be most helpful within a given phase of counseling, but that can still be useful in other phases. Target 1, establishing relationship and exploring, is the main target area of the early phase of counseling. Target 2, deepening. Target 3, growing, are most helpful in the middle phase of counseling. And target 4, consolidating and ending, will be the major focus during the late phase. Phases of growth and change and biblical and spiritual development. Okay, we're going to bring in some Bible now, apparently. It is important to remember the role of the Holy Spirit in the change process. We all have had issues in our lives that have taken time to change. It can be easy to look at counselees and become impatient or discouraged by the lack of progress they appear to be. It is in these moments that we need to reflect on the process of change in our own lives, noting the time and grace allocated to us by friends, family, and the Holy Spirit along the way. John 16:7-13 reminds us that it is the Holy Spirit's job to convict people of changes that need to be made in their lives. The same passage also reminds us that sometimes God withholds things from us because they are too much to bear in the moment. God is gracious and intentional in what he reveals to each of us at a given point in time, so that we do not become overwhelmed and discouraged. Instead of bombarding us with everything that needs to change, God shows us piece by piece where growth is possible. It is the counselor's job to be prayerful and discerning, noting where a counselee is in the change process and keeping in mind that it is ultimately the Holy Spirit's job to convict and motivate toward change. The emphasis on phases is not merely 20th or 21st century preoccupation. Scripture identifies a phase-like development in growth and change. We can see stages of Christ-likeness in 1 Corinthians 3:1-3. I'm sorry. A phase-like development in growth and change. Okay, Proverbs 9:6, Ephesians 4:12-16, Philippians 3:14. We can see stages of Christ-likeness in 1 Corinthians 3:1-3, and Hebrews 5:12-14. As Larkin, 1967, puts it, divisions of growth are thus a framework for spiritual direction according to the needs and possibilities of different people. Page 43. Larkin recognizes the need for a framework, yet also the need to affirm the uniqueness of each person in terms of how the framework is applied. So both within scripture and in psychology, the concept of development is crucial to understanding people, including ourselves. Last paragraph of page 25 says, in order to help conceptualize the various ways stages are understood in table 1.3 is a summary of the classical stages or phases of spiritual direction, column 1. These are aligned with the phases and targets as we are conceptualizing them in the counseling process, column 2. As an example of one other phase model in counseling, the phases of treatment of survivors of complex trauma are given in the third column. The language of each is quite different and reflects the focus of the particular helping relationship, though the language used in classical spiritual direction is perhaps foreign. This is page 26, perhaps foreign to many of us. It highlights several important dimensions of the counseling process. Phase 1, purgation, Purgation, purgation reminds one of the idea of purging. Purging is not a pleasant experience, but the term is descriptive of the need for people at the beginning of a counseling process to express, either reluctantly or in a gush of words, their pent-up, unprocessed life experience. This purging experience is what some psychoanalysts call catharsis, the venting of built up emotion in therapy, often related to the counselee's personal stories. Cathartic release or abreaction, a key element of psychodynamic and person-centered therapy, is considered healing in and of itself. Kearney, 2007, and Von Glan, 2012. The second phase of spiritual growth, illumination, highlights the increased understanding of oneself and one's circumstances and begins the interchange process of reflecting Christ-like virtues despite the struggles and frustrations that are inevitable part of life. Use of the word virtue highlights the fact that ultimately the counseling process is about identifying strengths and positive aspects of self, not only pathology and problems. The third phase, union, while using the idealistic language of perfection, suggests a point of completion, not unlike the rather odd term that often is used in the counseling literature, termination of the relationship. The important piece of this phase of spiritual direction is the idea of moving beyond oneself to connection with God and others in healthier ways that are characterized by charity, in parentheses, love. Yada, yada, yada. Table 1.3, comparison of phases of the change process from spirituality, counseling, and trauma therapy perspectives. All right, Christian spirituality, purgation, release of sin and its effects, illumination, growth in virtue and in renovation, and union with God and others, perfect charity. Blah, blah, blah. Counseling process, early phase, target 1, establishing relationship and exploring. Middle phase, target 2 and 3, deepening, growing. Late phase, target 4, consolidating and ending. And complex trauma therapy, safety and stabilization. Trauma processing, in parentheses, integrating the components of traumatic experiences, close parentheses. And lastly, consolidation and resolution. Note the three columns in this chart are not identical, but there are similarities. Each can learn from the other, yet each describes a particular type of helping relationship. Yada, yada. The bottom paragraph of page 26, the third column in table 1.3, identifies the phases of the counseling process with survivors of complex trauma. In parentheses, examples: sexual abuse, chronic domestic abuse, ritual abuse, close parentheses. There is a wide range of incidents that can be subjectively experienced as traumatic, whether or not an external observer would necessarily view them as such. However, unresolved trauma will inevitably interfere with life and complicate the healing process. In the first phase, a counselee needs to be helped to feel safe in the counseling relationship. Hold on. Hey, sweetie, what you need? Okay. 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 I'm recording right now. Did you text me this yet or no? If you could, you don't have the time to text. Okay. Well, I don't have the time to take the call, but I did. Scott. All right, this is like the last paragraph of page 26. There's a wide range of incidents that can be subjectively experienced as traumatic, whether or not an external observer would necessarily view them as such. However, unresolved trauma will inevitably interfere with life and complicate the healing process. In the first phase, a counselee needs to be helped to feel safe in the counseling relationship and to gain some sense of understanding and control of symptoms, particularly ones that are dangerous, self-harm. In the second phase, the focus is on the long, tough work of processing the traumatic events. In the third phase, the counselee experiences the resolution of the trauma and often emerges with a new sense of identity and wholeness. Praise God. The middle column identifies the three phases of the healing process that we will use in this book, along with the targets of, focus. Whether in a 20-minute conversation or throughout a 20-week counseling relationship, the three phases are important and typically present. As we briefly overview each phase with its related task, it is important to note that the phases are meant to build on one another and must be approached in order. With that being said, it is always possible and sometimes necessary to circle back and revisit previous phases in order to effectively journey with the counselees through their stories. The hourglass metaphor. The hourglass metaphor. The counseling process functions much like an hourglass. The top of the hourglass might, speaking of hourglass, here's my 15-minute glass. Boom, black sand. 15 minutes is great, but I need a bigger one. All right, the hourglass metaphor. The counseling process functions much like an hourglass. The top of the hourglass might represent how counselees are initially all over the place. The topics are far-reaching, and the discussion does not go particularly deep. Some of this is intentional on the part of the counselor in order to gather data on all facets of the counselee's life. Gradually, specific issues come more into focus, and therapeutic work becomes more narrowly concentrated. the middle of the hourglass. The sand flows quickly and intensity. The sand flows quickly and intensity and depth are increased. Finally, the content slash topics once again become broader as counselors learn how to generalize what they have learned and apply that to their lives and relationships, the bottom of the hourglass. This hourglass analogy can be helpful in describing the process of counseling both within each individual session and in the overall counseling relationship. The hourglass suggests that timing and control of the process are crucial. Too fast or too slow can hamper the process. The top section of the hourglass, initially full of sand. So here we go. Here's my hourglass. Superb, huh? That's got the black sand. That's the 15-minute glass, I guess you say. The top section of the hourglass, initially full of sand, this represents the information, the many details of the story, and of the counselor's life. There is often a lot of confusion, and while some counseling goals may be identified, others may be unclear. Target 1, establishing relationship and exploring skills will be most effective here. In more clinical settings, one of the tasks is to gather and organize the information provided by the counselor into a diagnosis. Again, borrowed from medical context, the concept of diagnosing a problem is deeply embedded in much counseling literature. An introductory overview of the diagnosis process is provided in the diagnostic implications sidebar. Turns page 28. All right, here we go. Here's a big old thing. Diagnostic implications. Let's rock and roll this. Diagnosis is the categorization of mental disorders. In most ministry contexts, diagnosing people is not helpful and is not done. In professional counseling contexts, it is required. The world of diagnosing is the world of psychiatry, especially trained medical doctors who typically meet with patients, listen for descriptions of symptoms, and prescribe medication. This is an essential component of mental health services, and as a result, psychiatrists are the experts in diagnosis. This is seen most clearly in the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders, published by the American Psychiatric Association. Note, this is not the American Psychological Association, which also uses the acronym APA. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Because of its technical language, research base, and medical aspects, the DSM is a highly specialized document, but one that has become very accessible with the help of the internet. Therefore, the general public has become much better informed, which can both be a positive trend in that people can take greater interest and responsibility for their own mental health, and a negative factor in that misunderstanding the technical aspects of diagnosis is likely, and there is tendency to use the language to label others. Let's just keep the Bible in Latin. Let's keep the Bible in Latin. It's not translated into common language. Just kidding. The DSM is described as being a theoretical in that it does not assume a particular theory of causation or treatment. However, there are a few alternative theory-driven approaches to diagnostic categories and treatment. McWilliams, 2011, PDM Task Force, 2006, La Abate, 1998. La Abate. Professional counselors must become familiar with the DSM and use it frequently, depending on their practice setting. It is advisable for helpers in other settings to avoid using DSM. The rationale for not using DSM is DSM. Check mark number one. Check mark number one says, the danger of labeling people. Sometimes when we label people, they end up acting according to their label, thinking about the profound influence labeling children can have. Check mark. The assumption that the DSM includes all mental disorders, it is not the only way of conceptualizing psychopathology. Check mark. The number 3, adherence to the medical model of understanding and treating people. This can be a limiting approach to understanding people holistically. Checkmark. The lack of recognition of the relational component of people's problems. A diagnosis is typically made of an individual. The difficulty in diagnosing cross-culturally. Symptoms mean different things in different cultures. Checkmark number something. The rejection of a spiritual religious worldview. The rationale for using the DSM is the ability to study groups of people with similar symptoms and to determine the effectiveness of various treatment approaches. Check mark number 2, the advantage of being able to focus our helping efforts to specific clients in ways that are evidence-based rather than just treating counselees based on our hunches or preferences. And check mark number 3, the recognition that specific categories of symptoms are more physiologically caused than situationally or dispositionally caused. And the last check mark number 4 for this rationale for using DSM, the ability to distinguish, at least to some degree, biological, emotional, relational, or spiritual issues. Oh, here we go. So watch this. When they say at least to some degree biological, we say physical; emotional, we say emotional; relational, we say racial; or spiritual, we put spiritual inside relational. Your spiritual is your relationship with God. So they're leaving out rational and volitional. Just letting you know. The DSM is a valuable resource. It has been and will continue to be a helpful resource for counselors of all varieties. However, it is a specialization that not all counselors have the luxury to learn well. So, caution is warranted. Of most importance in this regard is the recognition that diagnosing is not equivalent to counseling. Being a good diagnosticician is not the same as being a good counselor. They use different sets of skills. Excuse me. There's a little paragraph in some three skinny lines. Paragraph in three skinny lines says the narrowing of the hourglass. The counselor is seeking to facilitate the counselee's self-exploration and sense of self-awareness within his or her given situation. There is a narrowing or clarifying of the problem of the situation as the counselor and counselee work their way down to the neck of the hourglass. Target 2, deepening skills are essential at getting past what is often a superficial sense of what kind of change is needed early on in the process into the underlying or deeper issues. This generally marks the beginning of the middle phase of counseling. Thank you so much. All right, biblical/theological connections. We'll see how they do on this. See how they do. It says this: biblical/theological connections. At the heart of this book will be what we call a theology of emotion. Oh, that's interesting. Just emotion. Why not the other 4? As we learn effective counseling skills, we must wrestle with how we view persons, how emotions play a central role in people's problems, how the counseling process must pay close attention to the emotional experience of counselees, and how emotions factor into the process of personal and spiritual growth and change. That's weird to me. M. Elliott, 2006 and 2014. Peterman, 2013, and Scazzero, 2006. Scazzero, got to be from Independence. Just kidding, for a sense of this topic. A theology of emotion is anchored in the teaching of Scripture on the nature of God, the image of God, imago Dei, just threw that in there. It's not in there. In which persons are created, the interaction of emotions, cognition, which we call rational, behavior, and volition. Yeah, that's what we call it, volition, and the life of Christ. So that's weird. So yeah, let's go relational, cognitive, rational, emotional, volitional, physical. Subsequent chapters will unpack these ideas, which taken together present a preliminary outline of a theology of emotion. We believe such a theological foundation is essential for effective counseling. Yeah, that's weird. It kind of feels like out of left field. We do not take a positive perspective toward emotion for granted, since in our Christian tradition, emotions have often been thought of as the part of the person that most likely will lead us into sin. Okay. In the history of psychology, emotions have often been considered the cause of dysfunction and immaturity. Take a few moments to assess to what degree you believe/accept these statements as true. Where did these beliefs come from? Do they fit with a biblical understanding of human emotions? So here's a bunch of check marks. I'll read to you. Check mark number 1, there is a right way to feel in every situation. Check mark. Letting others know what I'm feeling bad. Why? What? Letting others know that I am feeling bad is a weakness. Check mark. Number 3, negative feelings are destructive. Check mark. Number 4, being emotional means being out of control. Number 5, if I give into my emotions, I will lose control of myself. Number 6, emotions just happen for no reason. Number 7, all painful emotions are the result of a limited or faulty view of God. Number 8, if others don't approve of my feelings, it means I shouldn't feel the way I do. 9, other people are the best judge of how I should be feeling. And number 10, painful emotions are not really important in life and should be dismissed. Yeah, it's just a bunch of faulty thinking, faulty statements. Thanks so much for giving us 10 horrible ideas. Oh, and here comes another, so 8 or something. Let's see. 1, I must never let my emotions get the better of me. If I do, I will be sinning. Number 2, only prayer can take away emotions that out of only prayer can take away emotions that out of control. It's supposed to be that are out of control. That's weird. Within the mature spiritual Christian, reason and emotion are in war, and reason should win. This is so. It's just all these stupid sayings. See, number 4, behavior is justified because you feel a certain way. 5, being emotionally restricted. Being emotionally restricted is just the way men are. Um, so that's 6, over emotional reactions are just part of being a woman. Whoa. And then being calm, neither up nor down, is a goal and a sign of good mental health. That's not true either. Being calm, neither up or down, is a goal and sign of being a spiritual person. That's not true either. All right, cool. Glad we got to read all these horrible statements. At the narrowest point of the hourglass, the counselor and counselee really zero in on specific aspects of the key counseling goals. There is an intensity and depth to this part of the middle phase of counseling when target 2 skills are being used effectively. Launching into the base, everything up until this point in the counseling relationship has led to this point, which could not have been reached without making its way through the funnel. And in this part of the middle phase of counseling, target 2 skills continue to be used, and target 3 growing becomes an increased focus as the hard work of growing and changing is at its peak. Approaching the bottom of the base as the process fans out and approaches the bottom of the hourglass, the late phase of counseling and target 4 consolidating and ending come into play. Let's not use the word termination. The changes that occurred during the difficult work of the middle phase of counseling now need to be consolidated so that they become permanent. Preparing counselees for leaving the counseling relationship is the final aspect of target 4. Each phase of counseling builds on the progress made in the previous phase, as long as the related tasks have been accomplished well, with each one serving to bring counselees closer to meeting their goals. See Figure 1.5 for a summary of the micro skills that are associated with each phase of the counseling progress. Target 1, establishing relationship and exploring, and it's perceiving, attending, reflecting content, reflecting feeling, empathic reflection. Target 2, deepening. Target 3, growing, clarifying, intuitive empathy, using metaphors, confronting, using the here and now, implementing change, expanding the counseling systems, appreciating the sacred. Target 4, consolidating and ending, consolidating, ending. Thank you so much. The phases, micro skills, and chapters. All right, 1.5, blah, blah, blah. Conclusion. Let's hit this conclusion. Praise God. Praise God. Conclusion, page 31. And then we have reflection questions that I'm probably going to have to write out. All right, we are excited to have you join us on this journey of counseling skill development, exclamation point, taken piece by piece. The micro skills approach helps students build skills one at a time, solidifying a strong foundation in the process of becoming an effective counselor. Like learning a second language or going on a bike trip, the journey is one of excitement and discovery. In order to learn the micro skills necessary for counseling, excuse me, it is your responsibility to come into this process with at least some degree of purpose, in parentheses, why you want to acquire counseling acumen, close parentheses, and intentionality, uh, open parentheses, a proactive and positive attitude toward the process, close parentheses, as your guides on this journey. It is our job, along with your trainers, course instructors, or supervisors, to give you some structure and opportunities to practice, but you in turn must provide the time and effort that practice requires. Your instructors and peers' responsibility is to provide you with feedback as you practice. In response, you will need to graciously accept constructive criticism, recognizing that receiving both positive and negative feedback is essential to successful mastery of a particular microscale. Finally, application is found first within your homework and in class, small group activities, and then within the ministry or clinical context is which you may work. All of this can feel a little overwhelming, but we encourage you to find purpose and motivation that will sustain you through the process. For Christian counselors, at least some of our motivation is not only to learn a professional or personally beneficial skill, it is also to follow Jesus' teaching and example. His concern and love for all people compels us to be as effective in helping others as is humanly possible. But despite a powerful purpose, the risks can be overwhelming for some. It is important to consider the cost of discipleship. Bonhoeffer, 1937 slash 1995, in this regard. Perseverance, or as the King James Version calls it, long suffering. Galatians 5:22. Ooh, are you saying long suffering as hupomene? Are you saying hupomene? Is a fruit of the Spirit. The Holy Spirit becomes our strength when we can no longer continue in our own strength. Welcome to the community of counselors, both in secular and the ministry based environments, who have gone before you as you learn the skills that can help you effectively care for the souls of others. May you be encouraged, transformed, and renewed in your understanding of how God uses each of us to care for one another. Now, I have these questions. Reflection. Think of a skill you have learned in the past: academic, computer, athletic, music. All right, we'll say soccer, and reflect on the process. How hard was it? How motivated were you? Did you become discouraged along the way? What were the essential elements in achieving success? What kept you going when it felt like you might never get to the hang of it? Number two, based on that experience, how would you complete the sentence? I learned new skills best by dot dot dot. Could this be helpful in learning of the new skills of counseling? And question number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 says, number three, in learning a new skill, what is the hardest part for you? What gets in the way? How are you going to compensate for this as you learn the skills of counseling? And for what has brought you to the point of wanting to learn counseling skills on a scale of 1, low, to 10, high? What is your level of motivation for learning counseling skills? What could you do to choose to raise that number 1 or 2 points? And how does your faith, your relationship with God, and His body, the church, Christian community, factor into this learning process? That was an interesting question there. And number 7, how will you handle discouragement when you are feeling stuck or frustrated with the slow development of your counseling skills? So yeah, this should be interesting. This actually should be interesting. I guess I should fill this out. All right, let me do that. All right, so or no, I should keep reading. I'm way behind. Number 2, chapter 2. I'll come back and do that. Chapter 2, person of the counsel, the person of the counselor. They give you Romans 12, 6-8. We'll see what it says. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. Awesome. All right. Chapter focus: self as instrument. Purpose: to examine the person of the counselor as a valuable tool within the counseling process. And formula: some of my strengths are blank. Some of my weaknesses are blank. I am blank and bring blank to the helping relationship. Think of 3 people you know who, in your estimation, are good people, helpers, and write your response to the following. For each individual, write a list of the positive attributes you see in them as a helper. As you look at the list for each person, what attributes do they have in common, and how do they differ from one another? I have to put Dr. Robert Kelman in there as the best I've ever seen, best I've ever seen, best I've ever heard. All right, and then now consider 3 individuals among your acquaintances whom you would definitely not put in the category of good people helpers. Probably don't hang out with many of those. I don't know. All right, for each individual, write a list of the attributes they carry that put them on your not a good helper list. As you look at the list for each person, what attributes do they have in common, and how do they differ from one another? Counseling is truly a both that slash and experience. It involves both art and science, knowledge and skill, comfort and challenge. Someone else is writing this. I know this book has multiple authors. There's a different author writing this portion, but it's okay. Just letting you know there's been an author change in my estimation. Counseling is truly a both and experience. It involves both art and science, knowledge and skill, comfort and challenge, grace and truth. To emphasize one part of each dichotomy over the other is to negate, or at the least to minimize, what the helping process can be. In this chapter, we will explore what it means for you to be the most valuable and influential instrument in the counseling room and how to develop each side of the both and equation. During this part, this is page 34. During this part of the journey, we will ask you to spend time reflecting on who you are, who God has made you to be, and the strengths and weaknesses you embody. Keep in mind that who you are is a work in progress, and that, just like counseling, growth is more about engaging the process and less about arriving at some predetermined destination. Next paragraph. Oh, my 15 minutes is up. Let's do another 15. All right. Self as instrument, embracing the art, micro skills, and academic learning are in many ways what comprise the science of counseling, as these elements are more concrete, provable, and testable. The art of counseling, on the other hand, is found in the person of the counselor and the development of her character, discernment, empathy, and attitudes, the development of oneself as a therapeutic instrument. The counseling literature is very clear that the most influential variable in counseling is the person of the counselor and the relationship that is cultivated with the client, Norcross 2011. It is not a formula or a series of steps to be followed, but instead relies on self-reflection, self-awareness, and an ability to take constructive feedback from others. All right, counseling as art, squares, a line. There's a line with arrow this way, arrow that way. Counseling as art on the left side, self as instrument, natural ability, intuition, and counseling as science, micro skills, formulas, scripts. One way to think of this interplay between micro skills and self as instrument is to use the analogy of the human body. For the purpose of this analogy, we will break the body down into two parts, the skeletal system and the internal organs. In counseling, the micro skills and academic learning are analogous to the skeletal system, as they provide the structure and framework of helping, while the development of the art of the self as instrument is represented by your internal organs, which sustain life. Without the skeletal system, key organs would be left unprotected and overexposed. Without the internal system, there would be no life or energy given to the body. Counseling works in much the same way, and that both structure and heart are necessary in order for the process to be truly alive and for the helping relationship to thrive. All right, three skinny lines all the way across the page, biblical/theological connections. This is page 35 of this book, Skills for Effective Counseling, a Faith-Based Integration by Elizabeth A. Nesbitt, Bonato, Heather Davdiuk, Gingrich, and Fred C. Gingrich. Biblical/theoretical connections. Cheers. All right, biblical theological connections. How do you understand yourself as a quote unquote person? What do you mean when you think or talk about your quote unquote self? How do you think of yourself as created in the image of God? To what degree are your thoughts rational, emotional behaviors volitional, and so are part of who you are as a person? How you view yourself as a person will significantly affect how you view your counselees. Quote unquote, the quote unquote self is a central construct in psychology. Much has been written about the nature and development of the self. For counselors, helping counselees to form a healthy self is an important task in the counseling process. To do this, it is our belief that the counselor's sense of self is, in many situations, the main instrument by which counseling achieves changes. It takes a self to help form a self. This leads to the question, what is the self? The Christian, the self, or the core of the person, was created by God in his image, Genesis 1:26 and 27. Theologians, philosophers, and biblical scholars have written volumes on the Imago Dei, Imago Dei, at the risk of oversimplifying it. The image of God has something to do with the aspects of our personhood, rationality, rational, emotional, you're forgetting relation, imagination, and so on. Personhood, okay, maybe that. That's okay, whatever. Relational, rational, emotional, volitional, physical, imagination, and so on. It also involves aspects of our ability to affect the world around us, through volition or emotion, all these overlapping things, to have an overall life purpose, as well as our ability to enter deeply into relationships. For centuries, the most common definition of the image of God was humans' ability to think, rational. That's what I'm saying, gather information and use logic. Hence the phrase Homo sapiens, knowing beings. However, is this a one-sided view of God and of persons? Duh, bro. In classically orthodox theology, God is described as impassible. He is not subject to suffering, pain, or the ebb and flow of involuntary passions like humans are. In the words of the Westminster Confession of Faith, shout out to the Presbyterians, Westminster Confession of Faith, God is, quote, without body, parts, or passions, immutable. This is 2:1. Another way of saying it is that God cannot be hurt, but empathizes and experiences permanent joy. What then do we make of the numerous biblical passages describing to God the many variable emotions, grieved, filled with pain, Genesis 6:6, anger, Numbers 11:1, angry and shows favor, Psalm 30, verse 5, delights, loves, rejoices, Zephaniah 3:17, loves, John 3:16. Scripture records many other emotions, both positive and negative, that God expresses. Some have argued that these are simply anthropomorphisms defining God in human terms. And that's the end of your connections. Thank you so much for the addition. While we will be working to cultivate both the science and art aspects of counseling throughout the book, the focus of this chapter will be the art side of counseling, the intuitive and subjective elements that make counseling a uniquely personalized experience. Turns page 36. One profession, many parts. 1 Corinthians 12:4-6 tells us there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one, it is the same God at work. As much as Paul was speaking to the church in general, this concept also applies to the work that counselors do. Although each of you are here because of some broad common interest in caring for people, you also each possess a different set of gifts, skills, abilities, passions, and interests that inform how and why you care for people. Consider for yourself. Question, what is it about helping others that appeals to you? And then next question, a good friend calls you to tell you about something really difficult that happened to him or her that day. How would you likely go about caring for them? The differences in how people answer these questions can contribute to the type of counseling profession they may go into or the type of counselees they prefer to work with. Similar to medical doctors who share the same core training but then specialize in, for example, surgery, oncology, or pediatrics based on their interest, abilities, and temperaments. Counselors cannot all be the same. For example, the skills and giftings that are needed to work with someone whom society would consider an offender of some sort, i.e., an abusive husband, a sex offender, someone convicted of criminal violation, in close parentheses, are different from the skills and giftings needed to work with those in more vulnerable positions, parentheses, children, abuse victims, trauma survivors, close parentheses. Just as the church needs people with different giftings to effectively reach the world around them, so the world needs various kinds of counselors to care for various wounds. The comforter versus the challenger. The counselor who is more of a comforter tends to see how support affirmation, empathy, and comfort could create a sense of safety for the counselee that could then enable the counselee to move forward in a healthy direction. The challenger, in contrast, tends to see how well meaning confrontation or challenges to logic, behavior, or decisions could facilitate the counselee's ability to understand his situation differently and thus move toward healthier change. There is a time and a place for both types of approaches, but most of the time, your counselees will need you to be able to do both. During my master's program, I, in parentheses, Elizabeth, had a counseling professor who once said to me, quote, counseling is knowing how to hold someone and hit them at the same time, close parentheses. He proceeded to say, and I have no doubt you can do the hitting. We're just going to have to work on the holding while you're here. Of course, he was not talking of hitting as physical or emotional violence, but the analogy really helped me to see both the strength I brought to the counseling process and where I needed to grow. Well, good for you, Elizabeth. It is important for you to determine whether you are naturally more of a comforter or more of a challenger. Do you tend to hear a person's story and see where she might need to be comforted, affirmed, or validated? Or do you tend to hear where someone might need to be confronted, challenged, or redirected for the purpose of growth and change? Rarely is a counselor only a comforter or a challenger, but most have a tendency to prefer one modality over the other. It is also important to keep in mind that when healthy, both the comforter and the challenger take on their preferred approach out of the same heart and motivation to help the counselor grow. Counselors who have honed their craft are able to identify which approach they personally prefer or default to, but also have the ability to adjust their approach in order to implement what the counseling needs in a given moment. The comforter comforts, affirms, and validates. The challenger challenges, confronts, and redirects. What about you? When you see someone in need of help, how do you conceptualize what help looks like? Does help look like a hug or the emotional equivalent? Does it look like words of affirmation and words of affirmation, Five Love Languages by Gary Chapman, and encouragement and a positive reframe, emphasizing what is already good and right in the counseling? Or does it look more like a gentle challenge to do, think, or feel differently, bringing attention to what might need to change or be corrected in the counseling? Once you determine which of the two sides of the dichotomy fits with your more natural inclination, you can begin to work on developing the other aspect. The priest and the prophet. Throughout this book, you will be introduced to psychological concepts and their scriptural counterparts, and vice versa. While psychological languages use the concept of the comforter and the challenger, scripture also provides a framework for understanding the person of the counselor in the helping process. Ultimately, counseling functions much like any discipleship process. The counselor meets the counselee where he is and seeks to partner with him in moving one step closer toward health and wholeness. For a Christian, this is the sanctification process and growing in Christ likeness. Well, good. I'm glad you threw that in there. In the Old Testament, there were two primary roles or professions that had the direct responsibility of helping the Israelites be in right relationship with God and to grow in the relationship with Him, priests and prophets. Both roles serve to help Israel be in communication with God and to grow in relationship with Him. Capital H should be, but the direction of the transaction looked slightly different for each. The job of the priest was to intercede to God on behalf of the people. He was, in essence, peacemaker and the one who facilitated reconciliation and atonement by pleading for God's mercy. In contrast, the prophet's job was to communicate to the people from God. The prophet was the truth speaker, both of affirmation and of correction, and served to facilitate change by communicating to the people God's perspective. And I'm going to say, they're going to throw in the word redirection. I'm just guessing. Similar to the comforter and the challenger, the priestly counselor and the prophetic counselor both share the same heart and passion to see people grow in wholeness and righteousness. It is simply their gifting and approach take on different forms. I was wrong. The priest, comforting, confessional, interviewing, listening. This is Carter and Narramore, 1979, page 114. And then the priest also thinking with, talking with, affirming truth, confronting the disturbed. And we do like that thing. Jesus comforts the disturbed and disturbs the comforted. You get a kick out of that. What about you? When you consider these two descriptions, do you find yourself more often in the priestly role, seeking to comfort and bring reconciliation, or do you find yourself more in the prophetic role of the truth speaker, seeking to promote growth through challenging people to change? You really want to be both, guys. You got to be open to both. You got to be prayerfully considerate of both. Yeah, that's just it. Consider sharing this analogy along with the comforter versus challenger, close friends or family in your life, and ask them what role they have seen you most drawn to over time. I am more of a blank. No, I mean, the right answer, you want to be both. You want to be priest and prophet in this regard. And I bring blank to the helping relationship. The prophet, uh, and you have all these little check marks for what the prophet is: convicting, confronting, preaching, lecturing. This is Carter and Narramore, 1979, page 114. Okay, great. Thinking for, talking to, proclaiming truth, disturbing the comfortable. So I would guess this book is highly anti-prophet and total on the priest side, and it is what it is. It is what it is. That's how they do it. How well do you know yourself? Each one of you has a unique and valuable story that has shaped you into who you are. The pieces of your story and how you choose to understand them work together to mold yourself as an instrument in the counseling process. A critical part of being an effective counselor is self awareness, which is your ability to know and understand yourself for good and for bad. Self awareness includes not just knowing what you like or dislike, although that is part of it, but even more awareness of your own emotions, emotional thoughts, rational motives. I'm going to say it's cognitive or rational as well, values, rational, and intentions as you go about life, rational. Sometimes emotional. Self awareness is generally cultivated through two avenues. Number one, self reflection, and number two, input from others. Self awareness involves self reflection and knowledge of, and there's 5 points: your strengths and weaknesses, how your past affects you, your motivation, your values, receiving input about how others perceive you. Well, very good. Self reflection. Self reflection requires you to slow down and observe yourself in a given situation by asking some of the following questions. Here's your piercing questions. Hello, Aunt Brenda. What up, Aunt Brenda? Just reading and discussing. Anybody has any questions, feel free to holler. Who am I presenting myself to be at this moment, i.e., the expert, the clown, or the nurturer? Oh, that's funny. Who am I presenting myself to be at this moment? The expert, the clown, or the nurturer? That's hilarious. Why did I just say or do that? What am I hoping to accomplish in what I just said or did? Where am I hoping this conversation or interaction will go? How did I feel right before, during, and after the interaction? What was I thinking right before, during, and after the interaction? What in my past is contributing to how I'm responding to the present moment? When I said or did that, how was it received by others? What meaning might others put toward what I just said or did? How might I have come across to the others in the situation in my tone, body language, word choicing, and timing? Awesome. Last paragraph on page 39: knowing your strengths and weaknesses. No one is perfect. Is anyone all flawed? Healthy self awareness means that you have the ability to identify both the strengths and weaknesses that you carry with you. It does not mean being prideful or dismissive about your strengths, nor does it mean being self deprecating or dismissive about your weaknesses. Instead, it is about being able to see both sides as part of what contributes to the art of your counseling practice. Keep in mind that strengths in one context may be weaknesses in another, and vice versa. For example, one of your strengths might be perseverance, but you may also have a tendency toward its flip side, stubbornness. Turns page. All right, try it out. Take a moment and write down 5 to 10 things, traits, abilities, giftings, skills, or interest about yourself that you see as strengths or assets that you bring to a counseling relationship. Now choose one of the things you listed above and consider how that strength could potentially become a weakness in a counseling relationship. Explain. Finally, identify one trait that you consider to be a weakness in yourself. How might this become a potential strength within a counseling relationship? Okay, what is my weakness, guys? Finally, identify one trait that you consider to be a weakness in yourself. What is my weakness? Someone tell me I'm ignorant and stupid. How might this become a potential strength within a counseling relationship? All right, understanding your past. No counselor enters the counseling room completely free of the past or uninfluenced by what has happened in her life prior to that moment. Part of healthy self awareness is growing in your understanding of how your past has contributed to your present. Please note that we are not saying that your past determines your present or that you are forever defined by your past. Rather, we believe that understanding the effects of your past can help to enlighten you as to why you are the way you are. As you consider your past and its influence on your present, some of your recollections will be positive as they are memories of joy, success, accomplishment, love, encouragement, and acceptance. But my 15 minutes are over. Let me do another 15. I got an hour. I got a 15-minute glass, a 15-minute glass of black sand. I do like it. I wish it was an hour though. But some of your recollections will be painful, being composed of memories of sadness, hurt, disappointment, rejection, and mediocrity or trauma. In both instances, balance, humility, and an acknowledgement of the good as well as the not so good that exist are important. Getting involved in your own personal counseling is often a good way to facilitate this domain of self awareness and to consider questions such as, all right, here's 4 questions on page 40. How has my family of origin or cultural background influenced my sense of self? How has my family of origin or cultural background influenced my understanding of health, dysfunction, forgiveness, grace, justice, and fairness, resolving conflict, success, and failure? And number 3, how did my relationship with my parents affect the way I now relate to authority and to God? And lastly, number 4, how did my relationship with peers growing up affect the way I approach friendships today? And number 5 on page 41 says, last one, last point. Number 5, last question. Sorry, what childhood events, in parentheses, illness, rejection, awards and recognitions, parental divorce, moving, abuse, etc., close parentheses, could be seen as influential in the shaping of my self concept. As you begin to explore more of your past, you will likely find that particular events have resulted in the formation of a lens through which you see the world. It's called a worldview, blah, 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 including the stories of your counselees. The lens is like a framework you have developed in an attempt to make sense of both yourself and others. The goal of self reflection in this domain is that as you grow in your self awareness, your past no longer serves as the lens through which you see the world, but instead becomes a tool in your toolbox, a resource you can use when it is appropriate, but also a tool that you recognize is not fitting for every situation you encounter. The only way for the issues, good and bad, of our past to move from a lens to a tool is through self reflection and growing self awareness, and oftentimes through personal counseling. Take, for example, a situation in which a female counselor, Glenda, was sexually abused by her youth pastor as a young teenager. Glenda's lens of the world became one in which she distrusted all males, in particular those in church leadership. If Glenda is unaware that this is happening, her negative biases may inadvertently negatively affect her counseling work with a counselee who is struggling in the same area. Example, agreeing with her counselee that it is unwise to trust any male, close parentheses. However, if Glenda becomes aware that she has trust issues with men, realize that she has believed the lie that all men are abusers, and works to determine which men are trustworthy and which are not, she is in a much better position to help her counselee wrestle with how to stay safe without cutting herself off from all relationships with men. Awareness of motivational factors, being aware of not just what you do, but why you do certain things, will enable you to have greater mastery over yourself in a counseling relationship, letting you function primarily out of your strengths and giftings rather than quote unquote leaking your wounds and weakness. Disgusting. We're leaking your wounds and weaknesses out onto your counselee. Your motivation for helping others will dramatically shape how you define success, as well as how you choose interventions in the counseling process. This is that chapter where it's like, okay, counselor, get your life right, do self, reflection, blah, blah, blah. You got something wrong, you need to figure it out, work through it, blah, blah, blah. Most students, when they are asked why they want to be a counselor, will say something along the lines of, because I want to help people. Okay, well, that's a good answer. While this is a great reason to become a counselor, understand why you want to help people. Great Commission, Matthew 28. Why you want to help people and to what end you want to help people are even more important questions. Reflecting on your motivation, ask you to dig into the depths of your heart and psyche to identify what your end goal is and how you will define success or effectiveness when working with others. Possible motivations for wanting to help people include the following. Number one, it feels good to be needed. Number two, that's not good. Number two, I appreciate those who were there for me when I needed it, and now I want to give back to others that would, pay it forward. Here's a bunch more. Other people have told me I have a gift for people helping. Perhaps if I help others, I'll be healed in the process. I've been told I'm a good listener. I see a lot of hurting people in the world and want to do my part to help. I'm not sure I'm cut out to be a counselor, but I'm willing to give it a shot. I believe that being there for others is a biblical mandate. I believe I have gifts of wisdom and discernment, and I want to use them to help people make their right choices in life. I've been going at this for 2 hours. Praise God. 2.5 hours. Knowledge of your values. Knowledge of your values. While it is virtually impossible to conduct value free counseling, part of self awareness is developing the ability to distinguish between your values, beliefs, motivations, feelings, and so on, and those of your counselee. Okun and Can Trowitz, 2015, stated concisely when they say, quote, if you are aware of your own values, you are less likely to impose them indirectly onto others. But you may do it directly. Sorry. You can therefore better facilitate a counselee's growth process from a position of respect and differentiation. Practicing self-reflection on a regular basis serves to sharpen your skills as a counselor while also protecting your counselee from unintended manipulation or value imposition. Next paragraph on this page 42 says, it is important to remember that values are not just spiritual or religious principles to guide us. Many Christian students think of hot topics such as sexuality, morality, and politics when they hear the word values. And while these are included, our values are much more nuanced. Sorry. And subtle in most cases. Our values ultimately guide our choices. For example, if you decide to have friends over for dinner instead of going out, it is because you place a higher value level of importance on hospitality or because you place a higher value on frugality. Both hospitality and frugality can be seen as biblical values, but both can also be executed out of prideful and sinful motivations. Be cautious of labeling something a biblical value when it is actually a personal preference. Other topics related to values included, and that's personal conviction versus biblical truth. That's in there. We've talked about that for 30 years. Money and status. Do you intentionally or unintentionally assume that someone of one socioeconomic status is smarter, wiser, more godly, or healthier than someone else? Do you assume that people in one socioeconomic status, I mean, James tells us, watch out for judging on economical statuses. Do you assume that people in one socioeconomic status are in more or less need of counseling services? What assumptions do you make about people who have outstanding debt, wear only designer clothing, drive high end cars, or do not have steady employment? That's fun. Those are funny questions. Money. So I've always, in the relational, rational, emotional, volitional, physical, I've always wanted to add the sixth one as either financial, or slash stewardship. That's a component of our humanity is the stewardship slash uh, monetary um, monetary dealings. So we shall see. That's a money and status. So it's cool that they talked about it that way. Gender roles. What expectations do you have for men that you do not have for women in work, ministry, and household, or or family responsibilities? What expectations do you have for women that you do not have for men? And then family composition. What assumptions do you make about people based on their marital status? Do you think more or less of someone who has never been married, has been married for several decades, has been divorced, is cohabitating, is a single parent, has children, or does not want children? The next one, parenting style. How do you react to parents who are authoritarian in their parenting styles versus very permissive? How do you respond to a How do you respond to a parental behavior that you perceive as somewhat abusive, yelling at child for a minor infraction? How do you feel about parents who appear overly passive or permissive? Sexuality. Do you perceive one type of sexual sin or dysfunction, premarital sex, pornography, infidelity, homosexual behavior, etc., as more problematic than another? Is that hierarchy based solely on your level of comfort or discomfort with the topic, or is it grounded in something else? Religion and spirituality. What assumptions do you make about how healthy a person can be if his or her faith system is different from yours? What primary, secondary, and tertiary topics? What assumptions do you make about someone who professes your same faith system but then proceeds to live in a way that you find incongruent with that system? Hypocrite, health and wellness. How do you define a physically healthy person? What role what role do nutrition and exercise play in your understanding of health? Good questions. How do you feel toward someone who is significantly more or less disciplined in these areas than you are? And giftedness. Do you respond differently to someone who is obviously gifted in some way, athletics, music, drama, dance, writing, intelligence, as compared to someone who has no obvious talents or someone who has disabilities? A clinical tip. A clinical tip, in its most general sense, countertransference, which I had to do my. Bless you. Need to take a little nap. Oh no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm rolling. I'm about to go do some exercise. I'm about to go rake these leaves out here. That'll wake me up pretty good. And Brenda, clinical tip in its most general sense, countertransference refers to a counselor's emotional reactions to a particular counselee. This can include responses to how the counselee or what what the counselee says or does. Your past experiences can trigger countertransference reactions as can your values being directly or indirectly challenged. Not all countertransference is negative. Positive countertransference can be elicited when we really like a counselee or are even physically attracted to a counselee. Understanding, managing, and appropriately using our countertransference reactions are essential to helping rather than harming our counselees. So some people say that countertransference is something happening without you knowing it. Some people say you're knowing it, low key, kind of knowing it that's happening. That'd be like if I'm counseling Brother Bobby, and but Brother Bobby reminds me of someone that bullied me in high school. That I'm now treating Bobby unfairly due to his reminding me of someone who caused me trauma. Okay. All of these topics are more, all of these topics and more reflect our values, the assumptions, expectations, beliefs, and preferences that shape the way we perceive the world. As you reflect on these questions and others like them, excuse me, the right answer is not found in being the most politically correct or in figuring out what you think your professor, pastor, or community wants you to say. Instead, the right answer starts with your own authenticity. Authenticity. And honesty, and then moves into a place of greater self reflection and willingness to allow the Holy Spirit to use others to speak into areas that may need to be changed, or His Word. Hopefully, His Word, not just other people, but His Word is the main way God speaks. Receiving input from others. Input from others is the next step in cultivating self awareness. It requires a level of vulnerability and teachability that can be risky, but it is essential to the development of self as instrument. As you continue on in your journey of becoming a counselor, be intentional in seeking out people whom you trust and who can point out to you the traits, giftings, and blind spots that they see in you. Your professors and supervisors will naturally serve in this role as they provide feedback on assignments and in your counseling practice. Additionally, a classmate you connect with or an outside mentor may also be someone to whom you can turn for this valuable input. We encourage you to intentionally invite specific individuals into this role in your life and to directly ask them to share their insights with you. This may come in the form of a conversation where you say something like, Kyle, I really respect who you are, and I think you could have good insight into who I am. If you're willing, I would like to invite you to share with me over the next few months what you see as my strengths and the areas I might need to work on. I'll do my best to not be defensive in those exchanges, but to dialogue with you about what you share with me. End quote. So, I mean, that's decent. While this process, someone's pulling up and parking here at the church, or maybe they're turning around. Yeah, looks like a turnaround job. All right, very good. But yeah, that was a good quote. While this process has the potential to be very personally enriching, it also facilitates the development of empathy for counselees who will one day sit in front of you, directly or indirectly asking you for your feedback on their lives. In addition to developing interpersonal relationships that provide honest input and feedback into your life, getting involved in your own personal counseling is also a critical piece to the development of yourself as an instrument. We are regularly astonished at the number of students who want to be counselors but are unwilling or at least highly resistant to being the counselee themselves. Conversely, that is funny. That's how it goes sometimes, though. Conversely, we meet many students who want to be counselors because of the impact that counseling has had in their own life. They have personally reaped the benefits and now want to pass them on to others! Exclamation point. Putting yourself in the role of the counselee with all it entails, cost, vulnerability, time, emotion, humility, and effort will serve to cultivate your own self awareness as well as your empathy for those who will one day trust you to walk with them in that role. And then it says, try it out. Try it out. Who is someone in your life you might ask to provide input into your self awareness process? What makes them a safe and desired choice? Number two, what do you hope will come from others having input into your self awareness development process? And what hesitations do you have about inviting others into your self awareness development process? Questions to ask others. What are some strengths you see in me? What are some areas you see I could grow in? Can you tell me about a time where you were impressed with the way I handled something or responded to someone? And number four, can you identify a time or a situation in which you could tell I was uncomfortable because I was being stretched or challenged? How might you suggest I approach a similar situation in the future? All right, page 45 is the diagnostic implications. Let me see this page. Okay. Oh, okay. I thought, oh, okay, we got conclusion. Okay. Okay. Dang, reflection questions. You got 15 of them. That's wild. Recommended readings on spiritual self care. Let's see. You got Foster, McGee, Mulholland, Ortberg, Baker, Benner, Barton. They leave Kellerman out. Dart. Where is Kellerman, guys? Not too good. Not too good. Entire establishing relationship and exploring. Okay. Gee, yeah, chapter 2 is huge. Okay, diagnostic. All right, diagnostic implications. Where are we at? 3 hours in? What are we? 2 hours and 32 minutes in. Okay, another 15 minutes is up. Diagnostic implications. One major debate in the counseling field revolves around the pros and cons of looking for pathology, mental illness in people versus looking at people through the lens of developmental challenges. In the history of psychiatry and clinical psychology, there was considerable emphasis given to identifying symptoms and diagnosing mental disorders. The counseling, marriage, and family therapy and social work fields have tended toward a non pathologizing approach that instead focuses on normal individual and family development and the many transitions that we all encounter in our lives. In this sense, much mental illness can be seen as development gone awry. Let me get a sip of coffee here. Yummy. All right. Let's see. Going awry. In the context of this chapter, the implications of this are significant. Should we see people, including ourselves, as struggling with a mental disorder or as trying to navigate a developmental transition as best as we can? Of course, we lean towards the latter. How you counsel will be somewhat dependent on your view of this issue and how you understand your own challenges. If you see a particular counselee you are meeting with, for instance, a young man who is a senior in college, as having anxiety symptoms indicative of an anxiety disorder. Perhaps referral to a professional mental health provider is warranted. This could possibly include referral to a psychiatrist for medication assessment. However, if you see this counselee as struggling with a major life transition with understandable anxiety about succeeding at college, getting a job when he graduates, mounting student loan debt, a romantic relationship on the rocks, and increasing use of alcohol to cope, the developmental lens may be very helpful and counseling may be warranted. Of course, our perspective is that both approaches are needed. Sometimes the anxiety is so intense that medication is needed to reduce the symptoms so that the student can cope. And counseling is needed. So we're just finally using the word cope. And counseling is needed on page 45. And counseling is needed to work through the cognitive, rational, emotional, relational, and spiritual. Spiritual is a part of relational, guys. Sorry to tell you. Spiritual implications of this transition. You left out volitional and rational and physical. Yeah, you left out physical and volitional. In terms of the counselor's use of self in the counseling process, it is our own reflection on our own personal life transitions, our relationships with family and friends, our emotional coping, and our thinking through issues in our lives that become the foundation of understanding others. It is our own experiences that become the foundation of understanding how people cope, grow, and heal. It is not that others will experience things exactly as we did, or that what worked for me will work for you, or that I self disclose my entire life journey because somehow that will be relevant to you. It is understanding my own process of change that can be helpful to others in their process of change. Page 46. Self care tending to be the instrument. Much of the time, energy, and attention of many counselors are spent in caring for others in one way or another. Too often, counselors have internalized the belief that their worth and value come from this care that they provide the people around them, which can result in neglecting the care that they need to give themselves. They forget that caring for others is something that must come out of the overflow of who you are. If your own well is not full, you will not have the appropriate resources to overflow onto others. Therefore, self-care is a foundational and critical component of longevity and success as a counselor, and it is our recommendation that you begin practicing it even while in this course. What is self care? Self care involves intentional practices in which you engage to restore, refresh, relax, and regroup. Self care activities can be as unique as you are, but generally fall into five domains: physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual. Relational and spiritual, the same thing, guys. Sorry. Sorry. You left out volitional. You left out the will, guys. You left out the will. Um, These domains often overlap, but they are all important in caring for the whole person. But you left out habits, you left out will, you left out choosings, our choosings. Physical self care. Physical self care includes anything you do to take care of your body. Counselors may have a tendency to focus so much on the emotional domain that they are in danger of neglecting their own physicality. There is value in caring for the physical structure that houses and sustains all that goes on inside. Consider how your ability to think or feel is altered when you are sick or in pain. We often take for granted what the healthy functioning of our bodies facilitates in our lives. As you consider caring for yourself as an instrument, reflect on what you need to do to engage in physical self care, as well as what hinders you from implementing effective strategies. Asterisks: how does my food intake affect my mental and emotional functioning? Little mini dots. Do I make sufficient time each day to eat and drink enough water? Do I notice that I feel better or worse after eating certain types of food? Do I use food as an escape or a way to self soothe rather than addressing my core emotions and needs? A diamond number two: what type of exercise or physical activity do I engage in to care for my body? Raking leaves, let's go. This is the official leave raking month in Louisiana, February. What type of, but do I feel better after aerobic activity, walking, running, raking leaves, that gets my heart rate up and lets me expel energy? Uh, Point number two: do I feel better after more reflective and stretching based activity, yoga, Pilates, etc., that helps me slow down and connect with my body? And number three: do I avoid physical exercise and activity? And if so, why? Me and Xander, I introduced Xander for the very first time to uh, soccer tennis. Soccer tennis, we're on a tennis court, kicking the ball over the net, back and forth to each other. That's good. Do I prioritize sleep and allow my schedule to accommodate the amount of rest my body needs, not just what it can survive? I do. I go to bed early. I wake up early. I wake up at 4. I wake up at 3, but I go to bed at like 8 or 9. So I think I'm doing just fine. What activities can I regularly engage in that contribute to relaxing and restoring my body? It's leaf raking time and burning leaves and raking leaves. Pray God. Mental self care. Caring for your inner world is of utmost importance as a counselor, and that begins with your mind. Okay, Philippians 4:8 speaks to this principle when it says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." Quote. Mental self care requires you to be intentional about what you put into your mind, what you read, what you watch, what you think about. Furthermore, mental self care is also about what you give yourself permission not to think about. There will always be more people to consider, more problems to solve, more self reflection to do. But sometimes mental self care means allowing yourself to, quote unquote, turn off and set aside those concerns for a time. This is not escaping and numbing but rather the intentional setting aside of worry, doubt, and in depth reflection, and replacing them with laughter, delight, peacefulness, and thanksgiving. Here's four black diamonds. Let's look at these four black diamonds. What types of television shows and movies do I choose to watch? How might they contribute or detract from my mental self care? Black diamond number two. What types of books do I choose to read? Is my quote unquote fun reading mentally and emotionally beneficial? How so? Do I allow for quote unquote fun reading? Or does everything have to be professionally and academically relevant? Why? Or how about spiritually developmental? Uh, Black diamond number three, what role does music play in my thought life? And black diamond number four, how comfortable am I with silence in my home, my car, in nature, and so on? In the science, itself? What do I find itself thinking about? Emotional self care, tending to your own heart and feelings, allow you to more appropriately give out of the overflow. You cannot give to your counselees that which you do not have. Emotional self care starts with being authentic or honest with yourself about your own emotions. Many counselors have learned to subjugate their own feelings in the name of caring for the feelings of others. Part of self care then becomes learning to re engage your own emotions, giving them voice and value. Emotions are a strong part of the inner world of counselors. Their self care needs to focus on learning how to use their emotions as an asset and not as something that overwhelms or overpowers their life. Regardless of whether you are generally overconnected or underconnected to your emotions. Emotional self care is likely to involve doing your own therapeutic work as the counselee. Emotional self care also involves cultivating relationships in your life that nurture your heart and care for you. We will talk more about this under relational self care. So far, so good. So far, so good. All right, Black Diamond, number one. Do you tend to be overconnected or underconnected to your emotions? And Black Diamond, number two. What are ways that you can attend to your emotions? Relational self care. It always amazes us when we talk with students who only have quote unquote friends in their life or whom they are the caretakers. And yet, time and again, we meet students who lack truly reciprocal friendships. Part of relational self care is cultivating relationships in which you are equally attended to, sought out, cared for, and nurtured as you, turn this page, do page 48, do these things for the other person. For many of you, this will feel horribly imbalanced if you are only quote unquote taking from a particular friendship, but in reality, it is simply more balance than you have experienced before. Reciprocal relationships are often identified by those in which both participants would say that they, quote, get the good end of the deal, end quote. In the relationship, these relationships take time. That's weird. These relationships take time and intentionality to both find and cultivate, but it is okay to be picky. Your vocation as a helper will give you the outlet you desire to care for others without needing anything back. Your friendships should not have the same structure. Black Diamond number one. What makes me uncomfortable about not being the helper in a relationship? Black Diamond number two. Who in my life is a reciprocal friend? And Black Diamond number three, which relationships in my life are not reciprocal? Is there something I can ask for, do, or change that might facilitate them in becoming more balanced? Are there some relationships I need to let go of in order to pursue relational self care? I'm sure of it. For not for me, but for others. Spiritual self care. Care of the soul is deeply important in the life of the counselor. At its root, counseling is about being a conduit for the Holy Spirit to work in someone else's life. A good conduit needs to not be mucked up or disintegrating due to lack of its own care. Simultaneously, the conduit needs to always keep in mind that the power The resource and the change is not of its doing, but of something greater and bigger. There's my boy bouncing the ball. Spiritual self care allows the counselor to remain in a place of humility and grace, a place that is awestruck by the honor and privilege it is to walk alongside another person, while simultaneously feeling the weight of that holy responsibility as a Christian. Spiritual self care includes various elements that can mostly be summarized by number one, involvement in a church community, and number two, engagement in spiritual disciplines. Empirical support. This is in tan or a gray box. Tan and Castillo, 2014. That's weird. I said tan. Tan. Okay. Take a comprehensive look at the literature on self care as it pertains to counselors, pastors, chaplains. Common themes found throughout the various studies Tan and Castillo reviewed included point one, excuse me, getting adequate rest. Number two, spending time with friends and family. Number three, spending time alone. Number four, finding and fostering supportive relationships. Number five, receiving ongoing training, supervision, and consultation. Number six, setting clear and consistent boundaries personally and professionally. Number seven, pursuing spiritual growth. Number eight, pursuing personal growth. Eight, exercising. Number nine, engaging in enjoyable hobbies. 10, asking for and accepting support from others. And 11, developing a routine or ritual when leaving the office to help emotionally and mentally leave work at work. And then the last one, maintaining and fostering a sense of humor. Okay, great. Involvement in a church community is something that all believers are called to, Hebrews 10:25. This is page 49, but is often neglected or downplayed because it can be messy and inconvenient. In church involvement, we gain teaching and input from others, and we have the opportunity to grow relationally and to find reciprocal friendships. Just like in choosing healthy relationships, it is important to be diligent in choosing a healthy but not perfect church community. Church often serves four primary purposes: teaching, worship, community, and service. In an ideal world, every church would do each of these tasks equally well, but the reality is that each church will do one of these tasks better than the others. Our suggestion to you is to consider in this season of training and development which task is of greatest priority to you in your pursuit of spiritual self care right now. Then rank the other task and pursue a church community based on that ranking. Just as you will not be able to be all things to all counselees, no church can be all things to every congregant. But if you are aware of your spiritual But if you are aware of your spiritual needs and priorities, it will be easier to identify and connect with the church community that is fitting for you. Spiritual disciplines are simply any activity that is intentionally pursued for the purpose of deepening your relationship with Christ. The key word here is intentionally, whether it is a discipline or thankfulness and celebration of slowing down or of scripture memory. The point is that you are purposefully engaging in activities that facilitate your spiritual growth. The disciplines may be things you do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or even a quarterly or annual basis, but they have a position of priority in your life. At the end of this chapter is a list of recommended reading on the topic of spiritual growth and self care. Sabbath. Another 15 minutes. I got a little 15-minute glass. Not an hourglass, 15. I need an hourglass. Sabbath. Sabbath could technically be included under physical self-care, emotional self-care, or spiritual self-care because of its significance, though we thought it fitting to give Sabbath its own section. Sabbath is the spiritual discipline of intentional rest and is something that Western culture is particularly poor in practicing, even though it is one of the Ten Commandments. The Sabbath is often disregarded as something to be fit in only after everything else is done and taken care of. Instead, Sabbath is meant to be a gift to people, not a burden. Mark 2:27. It is God's way of reminding us that not only is it okay to rest, but it is a necessity. In its strictest sense, a Sabbath is a 24-hour period in which work is intentionally set aside, reminding us that provision comes from God and not from our own strivings. In its essence, Sabbath is about ceasing the striving, abstaining from the busyness that consumes our culture, and taking intentional time to reflect on our dependence on God. We encourage you to prayerfully reflect on the role that Sabbath needs to take in your life. Black Diamond number 1. What does Sabbath currently look like in my life? Black Diamond 2. What do I fear will happen if I truly take Sabbath each week? And Black Diamond 3. What do I hope will happen if I truly take Sabbath each week? On page 50. Regardless of the domain of self-care, the need to attend to and care for the instrument of you is critically important to your success and survival as a counselor. It is not selfish, wasteful, or weak to take the time or expend the resources to attend your own needs. Counselors can only give as much as they have, and without self-care, their well of resources will dry up. Consider self-care as a way to indirectly but powerfully care for your counselees while simultaneously obeying and honoring the one who has enabled you to serve in that role to begin with. Relationship application. This is page 50, relationship application. Where are we at? 11:45 Central Time, 12:45 Eastern Time. All right. Relational application. I'm going to knock on the site. I'm just reading. What's up, boy? How you doing? How you doing? All right. It's 11:46. Oh no, I've been recording I'm reading this book. I've been recording for 3 hours. I recorded an hour earlier. Now I'm 3 hours in this book. Yeah. Yeah, when I run out of battery, I'm gonna plug them up, charge them. I'll come out there and rake some leaves or whatever. All right. All right. Relationship application, the development of yourself as a therapeutic instrument affects not just your work with clients, but also the way you approach other relationships in your life. Excuse me, just think about it. Growing in your self-awareness as well as in your ability to give and receive feedback is likely to affect your expectations and desires in personal relationships as well. Consider the ways each of the topics discussed in this chapter is part of your personal relationships. 4 diamond points. 4 diamond points. What type of friends do you choose? Are they more comforters or challengers? Do you share similar values? Where are you different? What strengths do you bring to relationships? What weaknesses do you have that seem to be a theme in your relationships? Black diamond number 3. How aware are you of the motivations you bring to interactions with friends? What role are you most often trying to live out with them? And black diamond number 4. How receptive to constructive feedback are you from friends, family, coworkers, and bosses? This last paragraph in relationship application. As you continue on this road toward becoming a counselor, in parentheses, regardless of the professional title you will one day carry, close parentheses, is likely that you will be changed. You will hopefully be changed as you grow in self-awareness, as you learn to let others speak more honestly into your life, as you learn to identify and cultivate friendships of depth and purpose, and as you grow in your understanding of who it is God has made you to be and not be in various circumstances. Be prepared for friendships to grow, change, and even dissolve as you begin to sharpen and refine yourself as an instrument. All right. Thank you so much for that. Multicultural application. Let's hit the multicultural application, 3 paragraphs. Every culture place a different amount of value on authenticity and on what North American culture would consider quote unquote constructive feedback. Uh, in light of this, people from different cultures will be more or less comfortable both giving and receiving input from others. For example, when I, Elizabeth, was working in Ukraine, there was conflict among the staff, focused primarily on the director's style of leadership. Having been brought in as a consultant to help in part with team dynamics, I went to someone I trusted who understood both Ukrainian and American culture and asked what level of confrontation and honest feedback was generally acceptable. He looked me straight in the eye and, without blinking, said, "Oh, in Ukraine, it is better to lie to someone than to hurt their feelings." End quote. That's better to sin. Better to sin than tell the truth. Okay, great. And no wonder Ukraine's all jacked up, and they have a cokehead for a president. In his comment, I was quickly reminded of my preference to both give and receive direct and honest feedback, while also being struck with how ineffective such feedback would be to someone who saw it as offensive, rude, or domineering. Contrast this with Dutch culture, in which constructive feedback can come from just about anyone in your life, with or without invitation. The baseline cultural assumption in the Netherlands is that it is actually disrespectful not to point out what you see in another person. Buckland, 2006. Both good and bad, but the feedback is taken far less personally than it would be even by many Americans. And the last paragraph there, as you work to develop yourself as an instrument of therapeutic change, reflect on the role that your own culture has had on the value you place on self awareness, input from others, comforting and challenging, as well as whether emphasis has been placed on the art or the science of counseling. Where you have come from culturally provides you with unique insight and resources in the counseling process, so long as you do your work to grow in understanding who you are and what has contributed to shaping you into that person. And in conclusion, this is the bottom paragraph of page 51. Says the art of counseling requires an intentional counselor who is willing to be self-reflective and open to feedback. Your journey of self-reflection is ongoing. It is less about arriving and more about the process of becoming. It asks you to bring courage, humility, openness, and teachability to this training process and into your life as a whole. Thankfully, this is not a journey made in isolation, but one preferably done in relationship with others who are able to encourage and affirm you affirm you while also speaking hard truths in gracious ways when necessary. As you continue to move through this book and learn new micro skills, pay attention to the skills you enjoy and which ones are less natural for you. Be encouraged by the times when your natural abilities are affirmed. When you come across skills that are less natural for you, fight the temptation to see yourself as lesser than a classmate who excels in that area, remembering that your unique strengths and weaknesses enable you to work with counselees your classmate may be less suited for, just as their giftings will enable them to work with counselees you may be less interested in. We are one body with many parts, and we need the comforters and challengers, the priest and the prophets, all the same. Dar, 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 dar. All right, now it's the reflection questions. We're at 11:52 Central Time, 12:52 for my East Coast people. Reflection questions adapted from Corey and Corey, 2011. Under the section, quote, awareness of motivational factors, close parentheses, we provided a variety of motivations for helping. Which of the motivations do you most identify with? What else contributes to your desire to help others? What do you consider a marker of a quote unquote successful helping conversation or relationship? What is the difference between exposing someone to your values or opinion and imposing your values or opinion on someone? What life experiences have you had that could help you better relate to others? What unresolved issues or open concerns exist in your personal life and that could affect your ability to work with different kinds of counselees? Who you are today is largely affected by the choices you have made along the way and how you make sense of those choices. What are some specific choices in your life that are particularly significant for who you are today, and how have you chosen to make sense of those choices thus far? Number seven, are you aware of the ways you avoid conflict or other anxiety provoking situations? Number eight, do you always feel as though you need to be in control of situations? Number nine, do you become irritated when others do not see things the way you do, or when others do not respond the way you think they should? Number 10, do you often feel as though you must be omnipotent? Um, that's all powerful. That you must do something to make others feel better. And number 11, are you so problem oriented that you're always looking for the negative for a problem and never responding to the positive, to the good? Are you Number 12, are you able to be as open with others as you want them to be with you? Number 13, what additional resources might you pursue to further develop your personal growth and self-reflection? And 14, some strength I see in myself are. Number 15, some of the growth areas I see in myself are. Recommended reading on spiritual self-care. Streams of Living Water, Celebrating the Great Traditions of the Faith, Foster, 1998, provides an overview of six timeless traditions in approaching spiritual formation that allow the reader to connect with biblical, historical, and modern examples of very different ways in which people pursue and express their relationship with Christ. Black Diamond number two, The Search for Significance, Seeing Your True Worth Through God's Eyes, McGee, 2003, comes with a workbook in the back to help readers process through four different lies that often form the foundation of one's identity, along with God's response or answers to those lies. Black Diamond number three, Invitation to a Journey, a roadmap for spiritual formation, Mulholland, 2016, is a wonderful introductory text to the concept of spiritual formation. The author provides insight into how different personality types, in parentheses, based on Jungian, Jungian typology, close parentheses, approach and reflect God. And fourth, Black Diamond, The Life You've Always Wanted, Spiritual Disciplines for Ordinary People, Ortberg, 2015, is a wonderful book for learning practical ways of incorporating spiritual disciplines into your day-to-day life, personal, funny, and practical. This book takes the stigma and dryness out of disciplines and shows how these activities can become the natural overflow of our love for God. Other recommendations: there's a Soul Keeping, Ancient Paths of Spiritual Direction, Baker H. R.H. That was 1998. R.H. Barton, 2009. Sacred Rhythms, Arranging Our Lives for Spiritual Transformation. D.G. Benner, 2002. Sacred Companions, The Gift of Spiritual Friendship and Direction. Yo. Sacred Companions. Sacred Companions. I don't know. I don't know if my guy was in on that or not. Surrender to Love, Discovering the Heart of Christian Spirituality, The Gift of Being Yourself, The Sacred Call to Self-Discovery, Desiring God's Will, Aligning Our Hearts with the Heart of God, Opening to God, Lectio Divina, and Life as Prayer. And then Calhoun, A.A. Calhoun, 2015, Spiritual Disciplines Handbook, Practices that Transform Us. B. Demarest, 1999, Satisfy Your Restoring the Heart of Christian Spirituality. 2009, Seasons of the Soul, Stages of Spiritual Development. R. Foster, 1988, Celebration of Discipline, Revised and Expanded. B. Manning, 2002, Abba's Child, The Cry of the Heart for Intimate Belonging. And The Wisdom of Tenderness, What Happens When God's Fierce Mercy Transforms Our Lives. 2005, The Ragamuffin Gospel, Good News for the Bed-raggled, Beat Up, and Burnt Out. Ruthless Trust, The Ragamuffin's Path to God. 2009, The Furious Longing of God. Homesick for Eden, A Soul's Journey to Joy, and Spiritual Direction and the Care of Souls, A Guide to Christian Approaches and Practice. All right, that was Moon, G.W. Moon and D.G. Benner, 2004. 2009, J.B. Smith, The Good and Beautiful God, Falling in Love with the God Jesus Knows. S.Y. Tan and D. Gregg, 1997, Disciplines of the Holy Spirit, How to Connect to the Spirit's Power and Presence. Okay, glad we got all that. Now it's like target one, establishing relationship and exploring. Okay, so this is where bing, 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 bing. All right, so I've been on here for 3 hours and 7 minutes. I'm going to hop off and recharge my phones and my laptop. All right, so I'm going to not fold the page because it's a library book. What up, Z? All right, I'm going to put this right here. So I'll be on page 55, establishing relationship and exploring when we get back. Z, you want to say peace out to the people? Can you say peace out?
Peace out.
Peace out. All right, Brenda, thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for journeying with me as we read this book. I'll be on a little bit later. This is my 15-minute glass. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Black sand, pretty cool to me.